From France, though.
No.
If it's got champagne on it, it's from France.
Yeah, well, it's not champagne, though. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, Julia Hartley-Brewer's here until 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, and she's looking in a very, very good mood, so I'd be very careful if I were you, because there's something up her sleeve to upset people. And we'll be back, of course, when are we back? 6 o'clock tomorrow.
I don't know, you start very early.
I do start very early, and now finally the rain has come. They said it was going to rain all week, and I was getting annoyed because it was sunny. But now it's raining. I'm feeling much better about it all. And I'll see you in the morning. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And a very good morning to you. It is a Monday morning. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Really appreciate you joining me, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device. It is great to have you join us. I'm with you all the way until 1 o'clock, and lots to talk about coming up in this hour. We're going to talk about the possibility of Donald Trump making a visit to the UK soon. That's the word that seems to come up soon, after a warm and personable 45-minute phone call between the US President and Keir Starmer yesterday. God, imagine having to talk to Keir Starmer for 45 minutes. Good grief. I have a funny feeling that Donald Trump was doing most of the talking. But he is the first European leader to speak with the president since his inauguration. They did avoid some contentious issues like Chagos and defence spending. But could Donald Trump turn up this country? Turns out British voters back many of Donald Trump's policies, according to a new poll, including more than half of Brits supporting the government declaring a border emergency in the Channel, as Trump has declared a border emergency in Mexico. I wonder also how many people would support a policy like we saw over the weekend, where Donald Trump basically said to Colombia, you won't accept deportation flights of your migrants and criminals. Well, I'm slapping a 25% tariff on you, and it goes up to 50% in a week. Oh, what a surprise. Colombia backed down, and those deportation flights were allowed to land in Colombia. I wonder what the UK could learn from that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also going to be talking about council tax here. 4 million households face council tax rises of up to 5 times the legal limit from April. Legal limit is a 5% rise, but there is a legal loophole which the about to go bankrupt, just gone bankrupt local authorities can use to plug black holes in their finances. We're also, of course, going to be marking the Holocaust Memorial Day today with around 50 survivors of the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau returning to the site today to mark 80 years since their liberation. King Charles will represent the UK at today's ceremony, and within the next half an hour we'll be talking to the great-grandson of one of the survivors of the Auschwitz camp. That's all coming up. Very much appreciate you joining us, and very much appreciate commentator Sam Armstrong joining us, as he regularly does on a Monday. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about Trump. He could be here. There was a phone call yesterday. Apparently there's a phone call booked today between his Secretary of State Marco Rubio and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. That makes him, I think, the 20th Foreign Secretary he's spoken to, because we're so top of the list. David Lammy is such a massively forceful figure in the world stage that the US Secretary of State has spoken to, you know, the Polish, the Australian and the Costa Rican and pretty much every other foreign minister before he's bothered to speak to Lammy. But Keir Starmer first on the list for European leaders from Donald Trump to speak to since the inauguration. Does that tell us anything?
Well, I think it is a mark of our declining stature in the eyes of this administration. We thought we had a good relationship under Keir Starmer with Joe Biden. It's clear that Donald Trump isn't a natural Starmerite and has put us down the list at the bottom. And all of this points to a real problem we've got as a country, which is we need close relationships with America, especially under this administration, that if you're not getting on, they can take tough action. And that means you need to invest in the relationship. It is not a good sign. It is not a good sign that Donald Trump felt he could take a week before he called up the British Prime Minister. Once upon a time, special relationship, closest allies on earth.
Phone call.
First
I mean,
phone call.
maybe Canada and Mexico, because they're the two nations that bordering America. But yeah, that's what you would expect, wouldn't you? I thought it was interesting at the weekend that Donald Trump was saying some very kind public words about Keir Starmer, saying he'd done a very good job. I mean, have you spoken to anyone from Britain? I mean, even a huge number of Labour voters don't think he's done a very good job, probably for different reasons than the reasons you and I think he hasn't done a very good job. But he's making nicey. We've certainly seen Starmer and Lammy and others trying to make nicey with Donald Trump. I'm afraid that's the deal. They're the most powerful economy military in the world. Yeah, it's a good idea to keep them on side. There is this massive fear of tariffs, adding to the difficulty the economy is in. And Rachel from Accounts, I mean, wasn't overly convincing on the Sunday morning shows yesterday. I mean, I managed, do you know what I did? I got my exercise bike to watch because I thought at least that'll keep me awake while I listen to Rachel talking about how she's turning around the economy. I mean, I didn't think it was possible to fall asleep whilst pedalling, but it is.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Rachel claims that she's an economist, yet her first year in office looks like it's a crash course in basic economics, right? We saw last week over the weekend that she's having to take emergency action to benefit whom? Millionaires. Why? Well, because her own policies have been so punitive that they have pushed millions upon millions of pounds of money, billions of pounds of money, through thousands of millionaires leaving the UK economy, taking their
one every 45 minutes have left the country because they can, because they're really rich and they've got homes everywhere.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, look, just to get our heads around this, right? One of the things about having an economy that doesn't make anything anymore because our energy prices are so high because of net zero is that the people that make a lot of money in this country do so through services. They can basically provide those services anywhere around the world that they choose to do so. And we have chosen to make it so expensive for them that they have chosen to uproot their families, to move them all abroad and to go live somewhere warmer or cheaper or just all round happier.
I mean, I love Britain, but wouldn't we all do that if we could afford do.
But it's really serious because every one of those was paying taxes to fund our NHS, to fund our services, and they are all gone.
And it's all very well like going, oh, these people need to pay more tax. Well, I get it, I absolutely get it. But the trouble is, but they don't have to, and they get away with it. And unless every country agrees we're all going to do it, it's not going to happen. In terms of the British voters backing Trump's policies, which I think is fascinating, a survey of 2,000 voters asked what they thought of the US president's agenda. Because a lot of people, I think, like in Americans as well, people go, not a big fan of Trump himself, and I find it rather amusing, I actually agree with a lot of the actual policies. In fact, some of his policies in America are more popular than himself, But things like declaring a national border emergency on the southern frontier with Mexico, but voters basically said, more than half British voters said yes, they'd like a similar border emergency declared here in the Channel. Things like getting rid of the nonsense of 187 different genders, or this idea that they said Britain should be a merit-based colourblind society, which, by the way, was where we were heading to before the whole woke agenda came up. They support tariffs in other countries to protect UK workers. Now, I'm very much in favour of free trade wherever possible, but the reality is we can't compete with a lot of countries on things because if our workers are better paid, and I don't want us to have people paid slave wages here because Bangladesh is paying slave wages. I mean, such as slaves get wages, if you know what I mean. But it is fascinating how many people support that, but equally, I think, fascinating and not a little terrifying. A new survey of various different generations in the UK has found that 52%, so more than half of Gen Z, I hate this generation stuff, but Gen Z, apparently 13-year-olds to 27-year-olds, so basically young folk, youth, we would call youth. More than half of our British youth would think that actually Britain would be ruled better if we had a dictator who didn't have to bother with democracy and elections. How sodding terrifying is that?
Yeah, well, it turns out, Julia, that contracting out your child's entertainment, education, provision of news to a Chinese app
TikTok,
that pushes all of these ideas on kids again and again and again in a totally unfiltered way, just pursuant to an algorithm, isn't a good idea.
Who knew?
And look, this is why, and many people have been saying this for a long time, that people who believe in a broadly liberal society, the kind of government that we've had for the last 20, 30 years, should have been prepared to muscularly go out and advocate for it again and again, to push it on kids, to say, no, actually, our way of government is the best way of doing it in the world. Yeah. Otherwise, what happens, other people who have much worse ideas of how to run society will come in and they'll tell your kids how to do it.
But also, if it's so fantastic, people say, oh, strong, this idea, and we've seen across the world, people want strong man, and it's always a strong man politics, But the reality is, those countries are so great, that people from democracies like Britain and France are flocking to them en masse. No, they're not. There's a reason why the migration routes only go one way. They all go towards democracies in the West. Why? Because that is where you get. But for all its faults, for all the problems, it's better than the alternative. Wasn't it Winston Churchill said it's the worst form of government apart from all the other kinds?
But Julia, these kids have been told again and again and again that their country is the worst country, that their values are the worst values, that we are repressive, that we are exploitative, and that these countries elsewhere around the world are the virtuous ones. So why is this a surprise?
And also morality and belief systems are all relative to each other. Again, this stuff, people think it's esoteric. It's not. This is actually down to whether people bother to vote or care about the democracy and protect things like freedom of speech. I'm still amazed by how many people, my generation who grew up with, acceptance of freedom of speech, aren't prepared to defend it now. In fact, go out of their way to try and damage it. Such a cornerstone of democracy. I'm still amazed that people don't vote. It blows my mind. It blows my mind that people don't bother casting votes. I don't care how rubbish the options are. Vote for the one man and his dog party, but you have to vote. Let's also talk about what's been going on in the Middle East. We saw, thank God, the release of more hostages. 4 young women, Israeli hostages, released again in return for a load of prisoners held by the Israelis who are, some of them, mass murderers and terrorists. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Being welcomed back by, even the apparently moderate Palestinian groups. But we saw that hostage return. Extraordinary scenes once again. It was like the Hunger Games, this scene that we saw when the young women all soldiers, but, you know, very, very young. Some of them they'd just finished their training days before October the 7th, 2023. And it was absolutely extraordinary to see them paraded in military uniform. Well, not their military uniforms, when they were taken captive. And we know what they were wearing when they were taken captive because Hamas put videos out of it. They were in their, you know, in their pants and in their pyjamas, a bunch of girls huddled together, covered in blood, crying. They were referred to as sabaya, which means sex slave. By the men who took them captive. We now know they were held in tunnels at times, they were starved at times. I was absolutely stunned by the number of people who were commenting online going, well, look at them as they walked onto the platform and they raised their fists and they smiled. Well, look, they look perfectly healthy and happy and apparently well. Yeah. Turns out the women had decided they weren't going to show fear in front of that crowd of baying Palestinian men and men with guns and in balaclavas covering their face. They wanted to show that they were not intimidated by it. I mean, what an amazing, amazing vision that was. And thankfully now back in the arms of their families. But we await the next set. And one of the women soldiers wasn't released. We hope that she's going to come out this, I think, Thursday or Friday. And now Gaza, northern Gaza has been opened up. Palestinians returning to, well, not their homes, what used to be their homes. What do you make of what's been going on?
Well, it was the most appalling, disgusting display I've ever seen. And anyone that is prepared to defend the kidnapping of 18, 19-year-old girls in their pyjamas from their bedroom when screaming, crying, covered in blood is a pig.
Yep.
And doesn't deserve any place in public life. And yet we know that there
BBC's had them all over the screen.
Thousands of people, millions of people, in fact, in this country that are prepared to defend and justify it. Look, I think what we saw on a more analytical level was Hamas beginning to flex its own muscles to show that even now it is claiming to be in control.
Yeah.
The cosplaying uniforms.
Those uniforms are very pristine. They've not been used for the last 15 months, have they?
They were green boiler suits, right? I mean, frankly, these were pretend uniforms, and some people were stupid enough to fall for it. Well, more for them. But also refusing to release one of the hostages that they had promised to do so in order to prove that, no, they are dictating the terms of this. It's classic terrorist behaviour.
Yeah. Wait a minute, I'm always blown away by this because this is an extraordinary revelation. It turns out you can't trust terrorists to tell the truth.
What?
I mean, mind-blowing.
Julia, it seems mind-blowing that for some people that Hamas are terrorists. Well, let's be very clear. Hamas are a terrorist group. It's the law of the land in this country, and anybody that is granting them any succour is supporting a terrorist group and ought to be treated as such.
What do you make of Donald Trump's suggestion that Jordan and Egypt accept not just some more refugees, they just accept basically the 2 million people living in Gaza, just take them all, clear the whole of Gaza out and start again, basically, he says. Now, I mean, Jordan, virtually half of Jordan's population is already of Palestinian descent. The Egyptians have made it very clear their policy, haven't they? Because if you see the size of the wall and the barbed wire fences and like that they have created on their border with Gaza, they made it very clear that they don't want a single person arriving from Gaza. What do you think of that possibility? Because it was interesting that Hamas immediately went, excuse me?
Well, it ain't going to happen, but I do think actually, and I have come to this view gradually, that the Middle East, this particular crisis, is crying out for some big, bold, fresh thinking of the kind that Donald Trump provides. And I'll tell you for why, because we have now had 50, 60 years of let's negotiate a two-state solution, let's all get everyone round the table together, and instead the situation has grown worse and worse and worse. Human misery has continued. There's been peace plan after peace plan by well-meaning people that I think are hopelessly naive.
Well, because they're dealing with terrorist groups like Hamas, like Fatah, like and again even the Palestinian supposed authority. These people are extremists. I mean, they don't believe in the two-state solution. They believe in the one-state solution, and that state does not involve Israel.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, Gaza, the Gazan problem is growing worse, in part because, I mean, we're told it's an open-air prison. We're told it's so miserable that there's a genocide ongoing. Right. Let's be very clear. The population of Gaza has gone from 1 million to 2 million in 20 years. That's quite hard going. The countries of Western Europe have got such a baby gap problem, such a small birth rate.
I imagine contraception is not freely available to women in Gaza, but that may be part of the issue. But the key thing is, I mean, across the Middle East, again and again, and actually across Europe, actually in the wake of Second World War, and indeed in the wake of the war in Yugoslavia, it's actually been the norm in the last 100 years. Mass movements of people and displacement of people, and people say, oh, this is ethnic cleansing. Well, Jews were ethnically cleansed from the rest of the Arab world. No one seemed to have a problem with that. Again, I think you're right. I think we're looking at big, bold ideas. Or it's just October the 7th being a risk every single day for the rest of the existence of Israel. So much more to talk about. We are going to be talking, of course, about Holocaust Memorial Day today, which is being held on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz 80 years ago today. We're going to be talking to the great-grandson of Lily Ebert, who survived against all the odds being in Auschwitz, although many members of her family did not. That's coming up very soon. First up, we are going to talk to Lord Faulkner, Labour peer, former Justice Secretary, about the political state of affairs. We'll come to him in just a moment. I also want to hear from you. British voters back many of Donald Trump's policies, according to a new poll, including declaring a border emergency. What do you make also of his threats of tariffs to Colombia and basically winning the right to get those deportation flights off the ground? Maybe we should try that on many of the countries that we, for some reason, can't deport migrants, illegal migrants to, and often even criminals as well. I'd love to hear your reaction to that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK to 87222. Get in touch at talkTV on X. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Remember that November 2020 presidential election when all debate around Hunter Biden's laptop was shut down. Then the pandemic. If you question lockdowns, you might find yourself suspended on Facebook or elsewhere. That whole social media debate room has completely shifted because of Elon. Now look, he and I don't agree on everything. And I don't bend my opinions for anyone.
So your views, you've been very clear about your views on
Yes.
Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
Absolutely no interest in him joining Reform or otherwise.
Let him do his own thing, we'll do our thing, and that's it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to get in touch on 0344 499 1000 to have yours say about British voters backing many of Donald Trump's policies, according to a brand new poll, including declaring a border emergency. Oh, maybe we should do that here. What do you make of the threat of tariffs to Colombia as well, if they didn't allow deportation flights of migrants? Well, the threat of those tariffs within basically hours seemed to change the Colombian government's mind. Should we try a bit of that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's put that question to Lord Faulkner, Charlie Faulkner, as a Labour peer and former Justice Secretary. Very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Julia.
Should we be copying some of Donald Trump's policies? Popular with Americans, popular with an awful lot of Brits as well, like, for instance, declaring a border emergency.
Well, I'm not quite sure what that would involve in the UK. Declaring a border emergency would mean what? Sending the army down to the White Cliffs of Dover.
Well, that would work for me, and I think many of our audience. I mean, we were able to close the borders during lockdowns and COVID. There was a fine even for going to an airport with an intention to get on a flight. For goodness' sake, surely we have the ability. We have an emergency, do we not?
I'm very strongly against that, Julia. I think the consequence would be the degree of lack of freedom for people. I recall the Home of Common Sense being rather against the lockdown restrictions, and yet you appear
against law-abiding Brits, yes.
And how would you choose, Julia?
I'm pretty sure we managed to do this quite a lot of the time. I imagine they managed to do it. But as a general rule, people entering the country who don't have a passport and haven't arrived at Dover or at an airport are illegal, in which case it's very easy to find out which ones because they're on a dinghy in the middle of the channel.
Well, what we've taken the view is that we let them in because and I'm in favour of this, we don't let them drown in the channel.
I'm not in favour of letting them drown. I'm saying you can pick them up, but they don't come on shore.
OK, so what would you do, Julia?
I mean, personally, if it was me, I'd pick them up the channel and I would just take them back to French waters.
But French won't have them.
Right, well, the thing is, the French don't have to accept them. We just kind of just take them back. Here you go.
And then what happens to them?
Not my problem.
Don't you need to think these things through?
I have thought it through. I don't want them in the UK. I'm thinking if you didn't actually get to stay in the UK, you wouldn't bother coming. I think that would be a really clear signal. It worked in Australia. If we had the similar sort of policy, it would work here.
I thought you weren't in favour of drowning them.
I didn't. I'm not. When have I mentioned drowning people? I've not said. I've not said just leave them in. We have all these ships in the middle of the channel, and we pick them up and then we bring them to the UK. The boats are only meant to last halfway so they can get picked up by the British Navy or the RNLI. What we do is we pick them up and we take them straight back to France. And if the French don't like it, they can engage with our warships or RNLI if that's what they want to do. I don't think they will.
I have to say, Julia, I think that is about as unthought out a policy as I've heard in a long time.
But allowing tens of thousands of fighting-age men to arrive in our shores, live in hotels and hostels and apartments, on the taxpayer, roaming our streets, that's definitely a thought-through policy.
Well, I have to say, choosing between letting people hover in the channel with nowhere to go, which appears to be your policy.
No, they can stay in France.
Well, France won't take them in. You don't seem to be addressing that at all, Julia.
No, I'm not. No, you drop them off on the beach in France.
Julia, sorry to interrupt you. What is your position when the French won't take them back on the boat?
What do you mean they won't take them back? Do you think the French military are going to stand on the Calais beaches?
We're not going to let them in.
Would we let them in? You literally drop them back on the same beach that they just come from.
We're not allowed in to do that.
Not allowed in? Well, I mean, not allowed in to do that. Well, by the French, because they don't want to. No, but what are the French going to do about it? If the French want to go and if the French want to put all their officials all the way along the beaches to stop us dropping, maybe those officials could work at stopping the boats going into the water in the first place. I mean, either way, it works for me.
Anyway, I think we're disagreeing on this. I'm not in favour of that.
No, because you're Labour. You're in favour of open borders. What about tariffs?
I think I'm trying to be practical. I thought I was talking to the home of common sense, but I appear to be talking to the home of cakeism here.
Why is it cakeism?
Because it's completely impractical.
I mean, A, it's not. B, let's move on. Tariffs. to get deportation flights off the ground. Donald Trump issued a threat to the Colombians. Now, let's bear in mind, America has a lot more military might, relative power to, American in military and economy versus the Colombians. Basically said, if you won't accept deportation flights to the Colombian government, I'm going to slap 25% tariffs on everything you send to the US starting today. And in a week, they double to 50%. Miraculously, within hours, the Colombian government had, allowed those deportation flights to land. Why don't we make similar threats to countries like Pakistan that won't accept some of their migrants back?
Because I just don't think that is practical either. We are not in favour of a trade warring world, basically. We will have to put up with tariffs which come from the rest of the world as time goes on, but I do not think that would benefit us in the long term.
Well, getting rid of some foreign criminals in some cases, you don't think that would benefit us?
I don't think the problem in relation to, for example, Pakistan is the deportation of those who've been convicted of criminal offences.
I mean, I think girls in Rotherham and Rochdale and Telford might disagree.
Honestly, Julia, if
do you not think they might disagree?
Honestly, if you're, I think we really, really, really need to look into the question of the grooming gangs in the northwest towns. I'm strongly in favour of that. But I'm understanding you to say that the solution to that is tariffs on Pakistan.
No, I'm saying the solution to that is deporting foreign criminals from our shores, which we often can't do because those countries won't accept them back. And we're told, there's nothing we can do. Well, Donald Trump has just shown there is something we could do. Maybe we don't have quite the same economic might to make those threats, but my God, it's worth a try, isn't it?
I think what you're proposing in relation to Pakistan is the problem in relation to Pakistan is not the problem in relation to the deportation of Pakistani nationals who've committed crimes here.
Well, lots of other crimes. I was using Pakistan as an example.
But it's a bad example.
Okay, if you say it's a bad example, then it must be a bad example. Let's also talk about Rachel Reeves saying in the interviews yesterday that the government needs to get a grip of economic problems. How are your government getting a grip on economic problems? Because businesses seem to be saying things are going in the wrong direction.
I think Rachel Reeves has been pretty clear that her position is you need to get hold of the public finances. That means you don't do austerity. You have to keep expenditure at an appropriate level on health and education, for example. That means you do need to increase borrowing and increase taxes. In order to bring growth, you've got to do structural things like planning, like more building, like promoting AI, like, for example, trying to reduce the interventions of regulators. And that is what she's doing. She has been absolutely clear that you can't expect to have growth if you don't also have well-organised public finances. And that means there will be problems like the problems we're having at the moment, which is people saying employers' national insurance is going up. That may have an effect on re-employing people. Which
not may have, it's already had.
Well, I think the employers' national insurance increase comes in April, as I understand it.
Yeah, funnily enough, people do actually, who run businesses, do actually make decisions looking ahead to April. They don't just go, oh, look, the tax has gone up. I didn't know this was happening. They make plans.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's happening. But have we not got to balance having proper, well-organised public finances without austerity against the need to do everything that we can to try and improve growth? And from time to time, there will have to be trade-offs. And I completely understand that. And so does Rachel Reeves.
Well, apart from that, a lot of people think a tax on jobs, if you want growth, is probably the wrong kind of tax. You talk about trade-offs. What is the trade-off between a third runway at Heathrow and climate change concerns? Because only a few years back, Keir Starmer himself voted against the third runway at Heathrow, claiming that, climate change was his number one priority. Now we're told it's growth. Well, it's kind of growth or climate change, isn't it, if it comes to Heathrow?
I'm not sure what the precise proposal is going to be on the third runway. I think Rachel was pretty clear yesterday that she was quite keen on the idea. What people have said is that if you have a third runway, you've got to ensure that the emission levels and the noise levels in Heathrow are within reasonable limits. And no doubt that will be looked at as well in the context of building the third runway. But in principle, if you can do that, and I think that you can, it may well be a promoter of growth.
Well, we know that a third runway would promote growth, but you absolutely cannot. There is no way a third runway can be built and still go along with net zero targets of this government, or indeed the last government, which is why none of this happens, because you guys have tied yourselves in a knot with that. Just finally, they're talking of somebody who would arrive somewhere, maybe at Heathrow. Donald Trump, there's talk after this 45-minute phone call yesterday between Starmer and Trump that he may well make his first overseas visit to the UK. Would you welcome Donald Trump arriving here? Do you think most members of the government would welcome him arriving here on a state visit?
Yes, I think I don't know if it's a state visit, but he's going to come, and I think we have to have a close relationship with America. The president is somebody that the government of the UK have got to get on with. It's like the weather, and so if he wants to come to the UK, good.
Probably a good idea for the Foreign Secretary not to have called him a KKK sympathiser and a Nazi.
I mean, I think practically. There's a huge number of people who've said unkind things about Donald Trump. He's now the president. We've got to get on with him.
OK. Lord Faulkner, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. 10:33 is the time. Quick word from Sam Armstrong, then we'll go to another break.
It's amazing that just any proposal to deal with any form of the problems of migration is invariably impractical. By the way, Pakistan, we don't even need to do tariffs on them, right?
Yeah.
We've given them £1 billion in foreign aid since 2009.
Yeah. Just stop that.
Stop writing them cheques until they take the child rapists back.
Here's my rule. If you can afford nuclear weapons, which they do have, you don't need our money. 10:33 is the time. I'm going to take a break. Up next, we are going to be talking about Holocaust Memorial Day. Incredible scenes later we're expecting at Auschwitz on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of that death camp. We're going to be talking to the great-grandson of Holocaust survivor Lily Ebert. Up next, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, today marks Holocaust Memorial Day. It's also a very extra special occasion as the 80th anniversary today of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. 1.1 million people were murdered by the Nazis in that Polish death camp. One of the very few survivors was Lily Ebert. She is a Holocaust survivor who has spent her life telling her individual story, trying to make sure that younger generations know what life was like, what death was like in that camp. Today, her great-grandson, Dov Foreman, joins us to talk this through. Good morning to you, Dov.
Good morning, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We know King Charles will be attending Auschwitz, the first British monarch to do so today for those memorial events where survivors are going to be able to tell their tales. It won't be politicians speaking, it will be survivors. And of course, fewer and fewer survivors of Auschwitz and of any of the death camps are still with us to tell their tale. Very sadly, your great-grandmother died aged 100 last October, but tell us a little bit about what Lily went through, what her experience was, and what happened to your family.
My great-grandmother was incredible. Aged 100, she still was going out to share her story in schools, universities, workplaces, places of faith, to fulfill the promise that she made herself in Auschwitz, that if she survived against all the odds, she would tell her story, not just for herself and for her family, but for the millions who didn't survive, because 6 million people were murdered in the Holocaust, over 1 million in Auschwitz, but there are still 2 million names of those 6 million that we don't know, because the typical story of the Holocaust involves the wiping out of entire families, communities, villages, towns, in rivers, ravines, forests, purpose-built gas chambers, factories of death. My great-grandmother was sent to Auschwitz in 1944, in July 1944, towards the end of the war, when the Nazis took the Hungarians, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews, and murdered over 420,000 of them. My great-grandmother was taken to Auschwitz with 3 sisters, her youngest brother, and her mother. On arrival, her mother, her youngest sister, and youngest brother were taken straight to be killed. She never saw them again, she never got to say goodbye. And she describes the moment when she arrived in Auschwitz and realised where she was, and realised that her family had been murdered. She asked someone who had been there a lot longer than she had, "What's that terrible smell? What factory is this? What do they produce here?" The prisoner pointed towards the chimney, said to her, "This is not a factory. That's where they've just murdered your family. That smoke, that's from the crematorium, where they burn Jewish bodies." And that was the moment when my great-grandmother had the realisation of where she had arrived to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so extraordinary. It is almost unbelievable, and yet it happened, and it's well documented. And yet to this day, and perhaps getting worse now, there are people who deny that the Holocaust happened at all. They deny that it was anything uniquely bad in human history, the industrial scale, deliberate murder of a people because of their ethnicity, their religion. Purely for that. Okay, yes, we know, of course, we know that gypsies, we know that gay people, disabled people, others were also deliberately targeted and murdered as well. But in terms of the scale of killing, this was a Holocaust of Jewish lives. What do you make of how so many people today claim, and I can never work out whether they really believe it or not, that the Holocaust, well, it wasn't a particularly evil act in history, or it didn't happen at all. When you know that you lost members of your family, I think in all 100 members, extended members of your family, were murdered by the Nazis in death camps. How do you respond to that?
We are seeing an incredibly worrying trend in the world, a rise of distortion, denial, a concerted effort by people to continue to dehumanise Jews and delegitimise their place in society. And we must call this out for what it is. It's pure Jew hatred, this denial, this distortion. As I said, it's a concerted effort. This isn't happening by mistake. Yeah. There are people going out on social media, setting up accounts with the purpose of indoctrinating our young children in this country and in others who are scrolling on social media, absorbing over 50% of their news from social media. They want to ensure that those people hate Jews. And to do that, they do things like deny the Holocaust. They go to pages like mine, where I share my great-grandmother's story, and they say that this didn't happen, or they spread hate. Every single day I wake up to hundreds of messages, people saying that the Holocaust was a hoax, that Hitler missed one, that what happened on October 7th to women should happen to my great-grandmother. And it's absolutely disgusting. But I think 2 things need to happen. One, we need to make sure that when politicians say never again, they actually mean it. Yep. That includes actually making sure that the education works. And yesterday a poll was released to say that 1 in 3 young adults, that's 18 to 29-year-olds in the UK, can't name a single Auschwitz death or concentration or labour camp or even a ghetto. That's shocking. And in fact, it's no longer surprising to me why we see so much anti-Semitism and why we've seen so many people in the past 15 months go out week on week sharing anti-Semitic views or standing alongside those who are. Because when education is failing so badly, when people can't learn from the past and see where unchecked hatred and unchallenged hatred, injustice and intolerance leads, and that's to places like the gas chambers and to places like Auschwitz, then it's not a surprise that they don't understand why being hateful on the streets against Jewish people is worrying.
Yeah, and indeed, and as many pointed out, you know, the death camps didn't just spring up overnight. It was years and years of you know, othering of Jewish people, blaming Jewish people for everything. And you're seeing it right now. We see it with those fortnightly marches. We see it in the reaction. Before there was a single IDF soldier in Gaza after October the 7th, 2023, marches, you know, basically blaming Israel for what had happened on October the 7th, that awful massacre. It is, I mean, I have to say, I found it absolutely terrifying. And I'm not Jewish. I found it terrifying, and I'm amazed by how many Jewish friends of mine have talked about whether Britain is still a safe country to live in, and that is an appalling stain on our country, that anyone should ever think that. One of the things you did with your great grandmother, though, was you talked about, you know, young people getting the information on social media. That, you know, you set up a TikTok account for her. She said she wasn't going to dance, thank goodness for that, but that she would answer questions and she would try and go to the places where young people were to learn about the Holocaust. They could actually learn the truth. And how fearful are you that, you know, she was 100 years old. She was a young person. There were other children who survived. There are people now who are going to be at Auschwitz today in their 80s, 90s. In 10 years' time, maybe there may be no survivors left. How important is it that those stories, their reality of their lives and what they saw and experienced themselves, that story continues to be told?
Julia, firstly, back to what you said earlier, I think the society as a whole needs to take what we're seeing, the hatred on our streets, as a warning. Anti-Semitism is for society, it's for democracy. What the canary is in a coal mine. What starts with the Jews never ends there. And when the survivors themselves are warning us that the words they're seeing are echoes of the past, I think we need to take those warnings seriously. And on this memorial, back to your second point, the 80th anniversary, we are seeing the number of survivors dwindling. We're moving further on from the past. The anti-Semitism is rising. The denial, distortion is rising. Awareness of the Holocaust is dwindling. And so when we are the last possible generation to hear from the survivors, we need to become their witnesses, and we need to ensure that we're listening to what they're saying and that we're able to pass on their messages and their stories to the next generations. Because 80 years in the span of human history is not a long time. And so the fact that we've already forgotten the worst human tragedy, which only took place 80 years ago, very far from where we are in the UK, is extremely worrying. And I think that we need to commit this year to ensuring that when we say never again, it's not just a mantra or a phrase said by politicians, but it's actually something which means action, which means that when you see hatred, you won't allow it to go unchecked or unchallenged. And we must also remember that never again was not only a promise of never again will there be gas chambers or Auschwitz-Birkenau's purposefully built factories of death in Europe again. It was also that never again will ordinary people stand idly by as this hatred against Jews and indeed against others went kind of rife through society. And that hatred is rearing its ugly head again today. So again, on this 80th anniversary, we have to decide, are we going to make never again actually mean something? Or are we just going to continue in the same trajectory as we have done for the last 80 years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with every single word. Dolph, I so appreciate you joining us. He is the great-grandson of Holocaust survivor Lee Ebert, who sadly died at the age of 100 last October, but thank goodness me, survived Auschwitz to tell the world about her experience. Sam Armstrong, I know this is a subject close to your heart. We've discussed this so many times. I hate that we have to even discuss this ever. I am astounded by what I hear, what I see, social media, and again, people even denying this event. This event is so well documented. It's insane that people can deny it even happened and call it a hoax and compare what's happening in Gaza with what happened in the death camps. What do you make of that?
Well, there's only one theme that runs through all of this, which is a dislike and a hatred of Jewish people. Let's be clear, there are people in our country and around the world that dislike Jews. They hate Jews. They do so for maybe religious reasons, maybe cultural reasons, maybe reasons of ignorance. But we should never, ever give them a moment's quarter to justify their hatred of a race on heinous prejudice grounds by hiding it behind support for any one of other causes that may or may not have some legitimacy behind it. But we should call it out for exactly what it is, and that's anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Steve, for that. Your reaction to that, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Want to get to your calls also about British voters backing many of Donald Trump's policies. Talk of him actually making a visit to Britain soon. Would you agree with some of his policies, like declaring a border emergency, tariffs on countries that won't accept their illegal migrants or criminals back? Love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
Have Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, saying, I'll deliver for working people. When?
You can already see that wage growth is the fastest in 3 years, with take-home pay after inflation being about £20 higher a week than it was before. We've seen evidence from the IMF, who have uprated our prospects, saying that we are going to be the fastest growing major European economy over the next 2 years.
If you really were pro-growth, you'd be cutting tax, you'd be increasing the scope of it, but you seem to be making ideological decisions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:50 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Delighted to be joined by your calls right now. 0344 499 1000 on the Donald Trump could make a state visit. Very warm 45-minute phone call with Keir Starmer yesterday. Donald Trump even saying that he said that he thought that Keir Starmer was doing a good job here. I don't know where he got that from, but would you welcome some of Donald Trump's policies here in the UK? According to a new poll, a lot of us would. Let's go to Phil, who is in Hertfordshire. Hello, Phil.
Good morning, Julia and Sam. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Regarding Donald
Trump... Can I just say, have you got the radio on in the background? Because we're getting it a little... We can hear us as well as you.
OK. Is that
better? That's better, yes, thank you.
Right, OK. Yes, regarding Donald Trump's policies, I'd love to see some of them in this country. And I was listening with interest to the Labour Lord that you were speaking to earlier.
Charlie Faulkner, yeah.
There is so much resistance and distraction and deflection. I really don't think, Julia, that they want to do it. It's not a case of they can't do it. They don't want to.
I got the impression that on things like on migration and things like that, illegal and legal, that the Tories they say they wanted to, and I think a lot of them did want to, but they didn't really have the will to do it. Whereas I don't think Labour even bothered pretending.
No, I don't think they do, and not at all. And I think the 45 minutes sort of telephone call that Donald had with Mr. Starmer, he said he was doing a great job, but he didn't say what he was doing a great job of.
Doing a very good job of running the country to the ground.
Running your country, yeah. Exactly. I mean, take a page out of his book. All they've got to say to Macron, stop them dinghies or we revoke your fishing licence.
Well, I think we already have for a lot of it, haven't we? No, they're still allowed. They are still allowed to fish in our waters for another few years, aren't they? I mean, don't forget, we'll be back in the EU under this lot anyway, wouldn't we? But that's the thing, we're not willing to do it. But again, those people wouldn't even go to France if they couldn't get to Britain. They probably wouldn't even arrive there in the first place. This would be in Macron's and the French people's interest. This is what's so mad.
Absolutely, and it's the deterrent, isn't it? That's the thing that will put the people off. And again, when we're looking probing into this, why are they flocking to this country? I mean, because it's the land of milk and honey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that, stop the milk and honey, cut off the supply, they're not going to come.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's just not that complicated, is it? It's like people don't have clear, rational thoughts about these things. What do you make of the possibility of Donald Trump coming on a visit here, state or otherwise?
I think he'd revel in it, actually. He's going to love it. And I think he'd get an awful lot of support from the British public.
He'd be very different from last time. I mean, I think also it would have to... Charlie Falk would question whether it would be a state visit. He would definitely want a state visit. He wants to be at the palace. He wants to be with the King and Queen. He wants a bit of William and Kate. I mean, that would be... Hey, that's what we've got them for.
Absolutely, and you could probably tell him a few jokes as well because he's got a great one-liner, hasn't he? He's a great comedian as well.
There is that. Thank you very much indeed, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. Well, he's in favour of Donald Trump. Some of his policies are being brought in here. Any chance of that, Sam Armstrong?
Absolutely not. But why shouldn't they? I mean, look at what happened with Colombia, right? This is a guy that was told you can't deport all of these people. Why? Because they won't have them back. It took him 45 minutes to shut off Colombia from being able to stand up to him ever again on this issue. And look, we could do exactly the same. Now, look, we don't have necessarily the same economic power that America has. We also don't have the same number of migrants coming over from these particular countries as America does. But we're sending these countries billions of pounds in aid. We are literally writing cheques to people that will not take back their own convicted child rapists back to their country. We shouldn't be sending them a penny. We should be sticking entry controls on. We should be freezing their assets. And by the way, the City of London is incredibly valuable to these countries, so we shouldn't do ourselves down too much. But politicians in this country are not prepared to do even the most basic steps in order to secure our borders.
But also Charlie Falk was saying, but we don't want tariffs. No, we don't want tariffs. Although, by the way, they're fully supportive of the EU. Do you know what the EU does? It's a customs union where it's free trade within, and they pose massive tariffs on anything coming from outside. I mean, they're all in favour of tariffs from different countries. But the main thing is, you wouldn't want the tariffs. The whole point is to use that threat to get them to do it. There we are. What can we do? I'm going to go to another call now. I want to get Ian on the line. He's in Newcastle. And Ian, you wanted to respond to that interview we just did with the great-grandson of an Auschwitz survivor.
Absolutely. As a British Jewish man myself, I'd just like to remind people, obviously Auschwitz is very, very true to our heart of Jewish people, but I actually lost family at Sobibor, unfortunately. But I quite agree with him that there is a number of Jewish people who are really, really concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism, and it's really, really getting to the point with myself and my family that we're actually considering sort of moving abroad or...
Where are you looking at going?
It's just really, it's really bad.
Where are you looking at? Are you talking about going to Israel? I mean, I have to say, what I find extraordinary is after what's happened in the last 15, 16 months, why anyone would question why you'd have a need for a Jewish homeland in Israel where people felt they could be safe because of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in America. But if you don't think Britain is safe, and I'm horrified and ashamed that you feel that way, but I understand it because lots of my Jewish friends have said the same, where would you think would be safe for you and your family?
To be honest with you, I really don't know at this point, but it's just a thought that we've got as a family, etc. But can I just sort of remind people also, Julie, and it's an elephant in the room that never gets talked about with this anti-Semitism as well. Why do these people particularly choose Saturday as these protesters.
Exactly.
Because it's actually our day of Sabbath, and it's really, really insulting, etc., to the Jewish community. And I don't know why people don't express.
And their urge, and the desperate urge of Jeremy Corbyn and others to walk past synagogues on your day of worship as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had it all my life, if I'm totally honest with you. I didn't go to a faith school. I actually went to a normal comprehensive school, and at school I used to get it. I was actually one of only 3 people within the school that were actually sort of Jewish, and I've had it all my life. I've had all sorts of racial slurs and people spitting at me, etc.
Do you feel it's got worse? I mean, certainly I spent a lot of my life living in North London, very large Jewish population, the largest in the country, and I've talked to a lot of my Jewish friends. They don't recall that, when we were all teenagers and early 20s, that this was a thing, that this was anything they were ever concerned about, and now they are genuinely worried.
Oh, never again should mean never again, Julian. We don't just say that as a just a sort of throwaway statement.
Yep.
Never again should be never again. And I wish that public could actually wake up and actually see what's happening, because I think they're falling foul of propaganda, especially from that particular area, etc.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, honestly, the nonsense that people send me, I mean, it's terrifying how, I mean, I don't... sod the abuse, I don't care. I know I'm on the right side if they're having to abuse me. But it is astonishing, just the abject lies that people will tell. Ian, I really appreciate your call. Ian's in Newcastle, and I'm deeply ashamed that Jewish people like Ian are feeling that concern. But I think it's very understandable, given what we've seen, I think, in America as well, what we've seen on campuses, this behaviour and the celebration of the kafir, of the celebration of Hamas, an organisation whose entire raison d'etre is the destruction of Israel and Jewish people, the murder of Jewish people, and being cheered on by some of the great and good in this country.
We know what they mean. Jewish people know what they mean. They know what they mean.
Yeah.
What they mean is there is no room, there is no place, there is no space for Jewish people in this country.
But also, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, he's saying all the right things. He's attending an event today with Prince William here in the UK to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. But this is a man who spent 4 years trying to get Jeremy Corbyn elected as Prime Minister of this country. Jeremy Corbyn, who has never found an anti-Semite or a fascist terrorist leader that he will not want to make friends with, and or lay a wreath on his grave. I mean, it is really quite terrifying. And Keir Starmer claims to be on the side of Jews. Truth will tell. Anyway, this is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very delighted to have your company today, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device. As I say, great to have you join me. I'm with you live all the way until 1. Coming up in this hour, I'm going to be talking more about Donald Trump. He could visit the UK. The word they used was soon. State visit or not? This after a conversation, a 45-minute, apparently warm and personable conversation between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump yesterday. It turns out Starmer was the very first European leader to speak with the president since his inauguration last Tuesday. But remember the days when that phone call would have happened the next day, not almost a week later? They did avoid some of the contentious issues like defence spending in the Chagos Islands. They also probably avoided talking about how you deal with migration, illegal migration and deportations. This after yesterday, Donald Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff on Colombia on all of their imports to the US if they refuse to accept flights of migrants being deported from the US. Those tariffs, by the way, were going to go up to 50% within a week. Well, within hours, the Colombian president basically gave in and those flights were allowed to go. Should Britain perhaps try the same sort of tactic with, say, I don't know, Pakistan or I don't know, France, given all those migrants arriving from their shores? Certainly, I'm asking you this morning about a poll which suggests that British voters back many of Donald Trump's policies, including declaring a border emergency. We spoke to a Labour peer a little bit earlier. He said, well, what would that achieve? Well, it gives you extra powers to control your border. Government were happy to do that during COVID, weren't they? Some of us would regard the emergency we see now with tens of thousands of military-aged men arriving on our shores from God knows where, perhaps as an emergency as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is your reaction to that? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. We're also going to be talking about what else is happening on our streets, with police officers being told not to use terms like black sheep or blacklisted in case they offend someone. Deep sighs. Also, police were told by a senior figure in the Met no longer wanting to do stop and search because they fear that there will be a complaint against them and their careers will be derailed. That is one of the biggest worries. Well, we're going to be talking about all of that throughout the next hour, and delighted to say commentator Sam Armstrong is still with me, joining us for the whole show today. Good morning to you once again.
Good morning.
So much to talk about today at home and abroad. We are going to be talking to Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas UK in a few moments' time. But in terms of Donald Trump's phone call, possibility of a visit, him saying, I did think quite bizarrely that Keir Starmer was doing a very good job. I mean, I don't know many people in Britain who think he's doing a very good job, but apparently the US president thinks that. Not sure which bit of the job he thinks has done very well, but what do you make of this? And would we welcome a visit from Trump?
Yeah, I think so at this moment in time, because it feels like it's a tale of two cities on either side of the Atlantic. In the US, they're sitting there saying, have you had enough of winning yet? I mean, come on. You said we couldn't deport these people back to where they came from. Turns out, if you show some leadership, if you show some strength, if you start standing up for yourself, if you remember that you are the greatest nation in all of human history...
Instead of wringing your hands.
That you put a man on the moon, so boy, can you sort out a migration problem coming over your border, then good times are coming. Over here, on the other hand, we have resigned ourselves to perpetual and continual decline, to the fact that we cannot even solve the most basic problems, that we can't grow our economy.
Can't build a runway.
We can't build a runway. We have to import millions of people, and despite the fact it's taking us nowhere, we have to decarbonise our economy further so that we import more and more and more and more and more stuff from overseas. So do I want Donald Trump over here? Hell yeah, I want Donald Trump. Well, he could teach us a few things.
It's not a surprise that so many British people, according to this poll, do actually support a lot of his policies. Interesting also, 52% of Gen Z, that's age 13 to 27-year-olds, according to a poll, said they think the country would better run if we had a dictator. Basically, we had somebody who didn't have to worry about elections and voters. I mean, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, others don't really have to worry about that. I don't know about you. quite a big fan of democracy. There is a reason why people are not flocking. We're told that these countries are very strong. No one is flocking to live in China. No one is flocking to live in Russia. No one is flocking to any of these basket case countries. Everyone's going, oh, I think I'll go and live in Belarus. You know, they're coming to the West for a reason, because democracy actually enables countries to function better, because they actually have to look after the people who vote for them. They don't do it very well a lot of the time, but that doesn't mean it has to always be that way. Do you feel that there is something of a feeling of change with the fact that Donald Trump was able to get re-elected? I mean, even if you don't support a lot of his policies, which, you know, some people don't, I support a lot of his policies, not all of them, but a lot of them. The feeling of sort of can-do, confidence, getting to grips, big picture stuff that we're seeing in America. As you say, such a stark contrast with what we see in the UK. We're just going to change non-dom status and we're going to just do this, and maybe we'll talk about maybe building a third runway in Heathrow. You know who I'm doing an impression of, it's Rachel from Accounts. But it's so tinkering around the edges. It's just so rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I'm someone that comes from the Conservative side of politics.
You've not made that clear.
But my recommendation, my message to Keir Starmer is, look, we tried this crap. We tried it, right?
Apologies for the language.
We went into office, we said we're going to fiddle around with this policy, we're going to tinker with that, we're going to get it down over time, we've got a plan, we're going to get there. And the public got to the end of it after 14 years and they said,
didn't work.
We've had enough of that.
Well, you're so bad, we'll put up with an even worse government in Labour.
And what I would say to Keir Starmer is, look, right, you have some crazy, in my view, crazy socialist ideas, some crazy left-wing ideas, but you're not doing any of them, right? You're not leading, you're not showing what you want to do. And actually, if the British public would back you on a bunch of it, they would back you on a bunch of it.
The British public is actually remarkably unfree traded. The British public is very much like, oh, I want lower taxes, I want lower this one, I want all these public services, I want someone else to pay for it. I'd like tariffs, British public are actually, they renationalise this, renationalise that.
There has been this perception within politics that over the last 20, 30 years that the less you do, the happier people will be, the longer you will get to stay. Take fewer risks, do less and less and less. And the reality is, nothing could be further from the truth. People around the world want to be led, they want to buy into an idea, and they want you to deliver it, they want you to have a mission.
No, but the thing is, but governments, and we saw this with your Tory lot and with this Labour lot, they're obsessed with doing stuff to bother law-abiding, tax-paying people going about their daily lives. Like, oh, yeah, you can't smoke there, you can't drink that, you have to pay more for that, you can't have that amount of sugar in your food or whatever it is. They're fiddling, they're irritating, drive 20 miles per hour, constantly these niggly little things to make our lives just that bit less fun and a bit more difficult and more expensive and slow. Meanwhile, doing nothing about the big picture stuff of millions of people scrounging on benefits, and it is in the millions. Schools failing en masse, an awful lot of children, total failure by management in the NHS, all of these sort of big picture things, stifling regulation and tax on businesses that actually the people who employ people in this country and create the wealth. The big picture stuff we are rubbish at in this country.
Well, it's because we bought into a bunch of nonsense ideas about things you just can't even move. I mean, last week we saw the fact that Axel Rudikabana, a man that stabbed multiple times, I'm not even going to go into the number, 3 young girls, we cannot sentence him to life imprisonment. Why? Well, because we signed up to some UN charter 45 years ago that our politicians are just implacably opposed to even going anywhere near touching. It is heinous. It is extreme that on the ECHR, on a dozen different international bases, we are told we can't do anything. Well, we can do it. It just requires a politician to have the gumption to say, no, we're coming out of that.
But also, we're always told we can't do something because this is the law, something we signed up to, completely unaware that you're allowed to change. Although, if we're not ever changing laws, I don't know why we bother having MPs at all. If you're never going to change any laws because they don't work anymore or they were wrong in the first place, then why bother having MPs at all? What a waste of time and money.
I hardly know why we do have a government, because it seems the same cabal of Blairite civil servants have been running this country for about 40 years now.
Well, this is the fascinating thing. Rachel Reeves was doing the rounds yesterday. I mean, painful interviews. She was being asked about Southport and the killings, and I mean, we were covering that on Thursday's show, and I have to say, everybody, I've never seen everyone, the production team, everyone outside in the office, so gobsmacked with horror about the details of that. I mean, Philip Ingram was here, he's a military man, he's an ex-soldier, both red-eyed, really struggling to keep it together. It was so awful. Rachel Reeves asked about it. It looked just mechanical. Obviously, our heart goes out to you. I mean, it's just mechanical. There's no... You just feel no sort of there's no real person there. But she's talking about how, she's the government, they're going to get a grip of economic problems. But a week or so ago, she's asking the regulators for ideas on how to boost growth in this country. Why on earth do you think Ofcom or Ofgem or the competition authority? What on earth do you think that they have got to do with growing economy? These people have no idea. Why do you go and talk to some entrepreneurs? Why do you go and talk to some people who started a business from nothing and now they're employing tens of thousands of people? Why don't you go and ask them how to do growth? Maybe they'll know.
Yeah, and by the way, the Labour Party used to do that. I mean, Alan Sugar was brought in under Gordon Brown back in the day. But look, it's because they don't want to do anything. Tinkering doesn't even come close to describing how little they're doing. They are going to change the tiniest regulations, and yeah, they're going to do that. And yeah, they might make a 0.00001% difference to growth. But at the same time, they are hamstringing the economy by putting up taxes. They're putting up massive regulations elsewhere, especially in energy. They are undermining up the educational reforms that have made a material difference, and that's a fact, to this country. Yeah. This country is going into a period of more and more and more decline. And the contrast, to go back to where we started with America and the United States, which is about to go into a period of economic boom, just as we go into a recession, is going to grow ever more stark.
Absolutely.
By the day.
And again, when you talk about people who speak English as a first language, where do you want to go to work? Where do you want to take your business? Where do you want to go and be an entrepreneur? Ta-da! I wonder where they're going to go. I mean, it's the fact that we're having a conversation over the last weekend about the possibility of a third runway at Heathrow being built. Oh my God! My entire life, people have been talking about this third runway at Heathrow. They're also talking about expanding, I think, is it Luton and Gatwick as well. But I mean, again, China, they just bulldoze over anything. They've got a massive big country, and we'll just put a runway wherever we want. But France does it. We were talking it last week. Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. I mean, this is a tiny country with a large population. They've managed to build 6 runways at Schiphol. It's a major international hub. The amount of times you're trying to get some of the other side of the world, you might have to go through Schiphol. It is extraordinary, the fact that we're still talking about it. But we've got a Prime Minister, Ed Miliband threatened to resign when Gordon Brown wanted to do this. We've got a Prime Minister in Keir Starmer who said only a few years ago he voted against Heathrow expansion because he said climate change was the #1 concern. And this is a government that's pushing climate change, spending billions of our taxes on pushing absurd policies that won't achieve anything, let alone stopping climate change, because it's not to do with Britain's fossil fuel emissions. We're going to have the lights go out in this country. Business is leaving. We've seen what's happened in Germany, entering their 3rd year of recession because of their high energy prices. Companies can't carry on. We're pushing all of this madness at the same time as saying we're going to have economic growth. If you can't build a runway in 70 years, I think, since it was first mooted, 70 years, your country ain't going anywhere.
Look, this country cannot build anything, right? We're spending 11 times more than other European countries on building stuff. There are some European countries that build entire projects for the cost of doing the paperwork in this country, not an exaggeration.
The consultation before anything, a shovel gets in the ground.
In order to build HS2, we're having to spend 100 million quid building a bat tunnel, a tunnel to avoid bats flying into trains. And by the way, the protected species of bats that we're spending £100 million to protect. Yeah, they were protected at the time the project started, hence why we need to do it. But the project has taken so long that the bats that we're now protecting are no longer even endangered. That is how long it takes to build anything in this country. We can't do anything. But by the way, one group of people gets rich every single time that we're doing it, and that is Keir Starmer's mates, the lawyers, who profit of judicially reviewing, who profit of consultations, who profit on challenging everything. We scream in this country that the way to get rich is not to go and build something, is not to build a manufacturing company. No. How do you guarantee yourself a good income in this country? You work on
stopping the people building things.
Interfering with the rules, interpreting the rules, helping them get around it. It is an entire fake industry, and it is dragging our economy back into the developing world.
And it's not just non-productive, it is sort of anti-productive, because it does stop people moving ahead. And again, I completely understand, it's like the house builder thing. I mean, I've been writing, talking on air, being supportive of these policies. It's going to upset someone. Well, yeah, you know what? We're going to have nuclear power stations. We need gas power stations. Someone's going to be upset. You build it. I believe we should be compensating local people who have to put up the building works and and the eyesores. But I'm afraid we need energy, and it needs to go somewhere. That's the end of the matter. Can I ask you, just before we go to break, I want to ask you about WH Smith. They're talking about selling off their many high street stores and keeping their hubs in railway stations and in airports. I have to say, I think it should be the other way around. I hate WH Smith with a vengeance. These stores are so badly run. The staff, I mean, I don't want anyone losing their job individually, but oh my God, I mean, the staff are usually, really, frankly, couldn't care less, unless they're trying to sell you a Terry's chocolate orange whenever you go buy a newspaper. And literally, they're pushing of chocolate at those counters. I know it's not their fault, they're forced to do it. You go into a WH Smith in the airport, you're not allowed to take your water through. It's like, £2, £3 for a tiny little bottle of water. £5 for 3 wine gums. I mean, they're such rip-off stores. I think it's great that they go under. I really do.
Yeah, do you know what? I completely 100% agree with you. If there is one symbol of Britain's relative decline over the last 30 years, it's WH Smith's. Yeah. I remember when I was young, you would go there, you'd buy a book, you'd buy some stationery, you'd go around, you'd speak to a human being, you'd be able to buy stuff you wanted, get it for a reasonable price. You now go in, you're ripped off, they've got nothing that you want, you go and have to pay at one of these self-service tills that ask you about 17 questions before you're even able to pay to try and flog you more.
But what's interesting, they want to stay at the airports and the railway stations where they don't have competition. Or you're forced to buy their stuff, rather than on the high street where people aren't going in because it's such a rip-off. Again, I don't want any individuals who work at WH Smith to lose their jobs. Or if they do lose their jobs, I hope they'll be able to get other jobs elsewhere if they're good or what they do. But it is just one of those things like, you are of the past. You are of the past, and you haven't provided a good service to people, and that's why they want to sell them off. But that tells you everything, doesn't it? That tells you everything about where we are. Anyway, 11:19 is the time. We're going to take a break. Up next, we're going to be talking more about Donald Trump. We'll talk to Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas UK. Are we going to see a trip to the UK from Donald Trump? Should we be following some of his policies? And why on earth did he say that Keir Starmer was doing a very good job? We'll talk about that next. This is Talk.
And I asked the question, was this man known to the authorities? Can we please know the truth? And Jonathan Hall KC, who's the terrorism czar, said many, many times, tell the public as much as you can without prejudicing the trial. I was demonised. I mean, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, many MPs, many broadcasters, newspaper columns said that I'd incited the riots by simply asking for the truth. I think the riots happened in many ways because of that lack of information. And I asked the question, was this man known to the authorities? Can we please know the truth? And Jonathan Hall KC, who's the terrorism czar, said many, many times, tell the public as much as you can without prejudicing the trial.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Don't forget, a little bit later in the hour, we're going to be taking more of your calls, 0344 499 1000. I want to know from you why British voters are backing many of Donald Trump's policies, according to a new poll, including declaring a border emergency. What impact would that have here? What do you make also of Donald Trump's threats of tariffs on Colombia, when the Colombian president said he wouldn't accept a couple of plane loads of deported Colombians back to the country? Well, funnily enough, that threat of 25% tariffs going up in a week's time to 50% tariffs on all goods to be sold in America seemed to change the president's mind. Maybe we should do a little bit of that here. What do you think? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Get some of your messages coming up very soon. Let's talk about all of that with Greg Swenson, who's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Very good morning to you, Greg.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. First of all, can I just ask, ahead of this 45-minute phone call that Trump and Starmer had yesterday, apparently all nicey, on Saturday, Donald Trump was reported as saying that he thought that Keir Starmer was doing a very good job. Why does he think that?
I'm not sure he really meant it. I think he was being polite. You know, he was being sociable. I think if he wanted to be a critic, there's a long list of disasters here in the UK. So I think he's just trying to reach out and be polite. So good for him.
What do you make of the fact that Keir Starmer is the first European leader to have a one-on-one phone call with Donald Trump since his inauguration, but that it took from Tuesday's inauguration all the way till Sunday for that phone call to take place? There was a time when an American president would make one of his very first phone calls in the first full day in office to the British Prime Minister. I mean, he's reinstalled the bust of Winston Churchill in the Oval Office, which we thought was a good sign, but apparently Keir Starmer's further down the list.
Yeah, I mean, that might be true, although I think he just President Trump had a really busy week. He
Getting
hit
stuff
the ground
done.
running. Yeah, I mean, he really hit the ground running with the executive orders. He was, really 24/7. And so I wouldn't read too much into that. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, made a list of phone calls. Only one European country was on it, and that was Poland. So, but this, there's been a bit of a speed bump in the relationship. Partly, that might be some of the scar tissue from Keir and from David Lammy, Matt Mandelson. But also, remember when Joe Biden was executing the debacle in Afghanistan, he wasn't picking up Boris Johnson's phone calls.
No, indeed.
I think there's some mending to do.
How damaging do you think David Lammy's comments in the past about Donald Trump? I know that he was there at that dinner with Keir Starmer, with Donald Trump in Washington last year. But how damaging do you think it was that he had said to him, publicly on record, on Twitter and in TV interviews that he's a KKK sympathiser, Nazi sympathiser. He doesn't.
White nationalist.
White nationalist. He shouldn't be in the country because Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State under Trump, you say he's made a lot of phone calls. The only other European country was Poland. He's going to, we understand, speak to David Lammy today. But he's spoken to the president. He's spoken to the leaders of Australia and Costa Rica before he's spoken to the British Foreign Secretary. Yeah, look, I don't think it's permanent damage from David Lammy's past comments, and even Marco Rubio had comments about President Trump, 8 years ago.
I mean, to be fair, Trump had comments about Marco Rubio.
Yeah, and I don't think it's helpful, the comments, but I don't think it's permanent. I don't think the damage is permanent. And I think President Trump is, and as you saw in his comments yesterday over the weekend, he's reaching out. The UK is very important to this president.
What do you think the chances are of this trip from Donald Trump coming to the UK fairly soon? We know that Theresa May was the first foreign leader to visit Trump in Washington when she was, in his first term, when she was Prime Minister here. But a trip, would that be likely to be, do you think, a state trip on the basis that Donald Trump wants to be with the royals, he wants to go to he wanted a little bit of William and Kate Stardust as well as the Kings, and basically this is what we have a royal family for, to do this stuff. Do you think that's likely?
Yes, and there's no one better at it than Great Britain, and I think the president would really enjoy it. He loved his 2 trips in his first term, and he's much more popular now than he was in his first term, as you were mentioning earlier. So I think it's a great time if the Labour government, I know they're not going to go full MAGA. Okay, we get that. But if they could just take a few pages out of President Trump's playbook, I think it would be a great benefit to the country and to the party, to the Labour Party.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are watching this. I mean, let's talk about the Colombia threat. Tiny country, close to America, an awful lot of migrants. The president wants to deport. Basically, Colombian government says no, you can't send these people back like they're criminals and these illegal migrants on a military plane. I'm not going to accept the plane. That threat made within hours of the threat of 25% tariffs. Colombia had to renege. Is that basically how Trump is going to do business from now on?
I think so, especially with socialist countries that are very critical of him, but also, remember, they sent criminals to the border, and that's what we have. The first deportations, and probably all or most of the deportations, will be criminals. One of the men on that plane killed a 19-year-old woman, and with a drunk driving, and those are the people that are being deported right now. So the fact that the Colombian president initially said, there are heroes, they're going to get heroes welcome and come in on commercial planes, and we'll have flowers for them. That was just absurd, and so. President Trump is not fooling around here. And I think it was very wise of the Colombian president to buckle, because the U.S. is the #1 export destination for Colombia. So that was something that he couldn't live with.
Is that something, do you think, that the British government could try with some of the countries we're trying to deport some of the unwanted folk here to?
I think that would be wise. It's a shame that we have to do that. And, the Colombian president should have accepted the illegal migrants immediately, just because it's the right thing to do. But instead, he had to, sort of play games with the president and look at the outcomes. So President Trump's all about outcomes. He's all about results. So, he's going to, use different kind of methods to get there. But whatever he does, he's got the end game in mind.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. It'll be interesting to see. I can't wait to see the likes of David Lammy fawning all over the president if and when he does arrive here. Greg Swenson, he's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you for that. Sam Armstrong, allied to this, I also want to talk about what Donald Trump has had to say about Gaza over the weekend, talking about how, maybe we should, the Jordanians and the Egyptians should take the 2 million residents of Gaza, offer them a home. Jordan, half their population of Palestinian heritage. Basically, he used the phrase, clear out Gaza. It's just a building site. It's rubble now. Clear it out and kind of start again and give those people a life in peace in countries at peace. Hasn't gone down too well with Hamas, that. But I wonder if, for a lot of people living in Gaza, that would be an opportunity.
It's almost as if Hamas are keen to hold on to their network of terror tunnels and don't want the whole place getting renovated and turned into a peaceful paradise that it could be. And look, it would not be the most complicated project on earth to rebuild Gaza, right? It wouldn't. It just isn't.
Although the fact that Hamas have actually said they need a network of tunnels. I mean, it's laughable.
These people are terrorists. They need to keep a terrorist infrastructure together. But look, you always get these heinous lies. Any time that there's a proposal put forward, you get these heinous lies. Let me just take on one thing. The Colombian president said it was immoral, it was wrong, it was unethical to send migrants back that included murderers and sex predators on military planes. He said that was wrong. Those same military planes take brave American servicemen and women to war, flying far further to the most dangerous places on earth. Those American brave heroes sit on those planes without raising such as a whimper of complaint and excuses. It is immoral. It is unethical. It is disgusting to say that sex offenders, the murderers and the rest of them cannot be deported in this way. And we get this lie again and again and again. We have heroes in this country country that suffer really dignified situations in prisons and the police, in the army, doing great things for our country. And we are told that we cannot do any of the same things.
Yeah, it's just
the
absurd.
Minor inconvenience to these migrants that are coming into this country and breaking the law.
No, but they'll say you just don't have a right to stay here. No one has a right to be here apart from British people. And we have a duty to take back our British criminals if they're abroad. And we've done that in the past. I find it extraordinary that anyone even questions this. It's a level of insanity that we're in these days, that it's even up for grabs. I mean, all credit to Donald Trump on that. And if that's what you have to do to get sanity, then so be it. And I think that's why an awful lot of young Brits, terrifyingly, say they want a dictator rather than having to have elections if they think that would be strong government. But more than half of Gen Z, that's up to 27-year-olds, think that. But no wonder they do when democratically elected governments fail to actually do the job. Terrifying. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Do give us a call about anything to do with Trump. In fact, anything we're talking about, you know you're always welcome to give us a call. 0344 499 1000. Up next, going to be talking about, whether we could follow suit. Danny Shaw is going to be joining us in terms of those migrant boats, but also why so much of our policing goes so wrong. That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:35 is the time. Joined now by Danny Shaw, policing, crime and justice commentator. Good morning to you, Danny.
Morning, Julia. Hi.
Thanks for joining us. I just want to ask you, really, just first of all, linking to what we've just been talking about with Donald Trump, this policy of, well, you know, if you don't take back your migrants, then we're going to impose tariffs on you. A lot of people are saying, oh, actually, this sounds like a good idea. Why doesn't Britain do that when it comes to either returning migrants from many other countries, like Pakistan and others who often won't accept, or indeed returning boat migrants to France? What do you make of that? Could we do it?
Well, I think there is a way of doing something similar, which is, you know, you have agreements with countries that they accept people, and in return, for example, you know, the UK makes it easier for people who want to come here legally to get visas. I think that kind of soft power has existed in the past.
Yeah.
And it requires negotiation and diplomacy between the two countries. OK, we've got a bunch of foreign criminals. We need to get them back to your country. You accept them. And, you know, in return, if, you know, we'll make the visa regime a bit easier for you so that people who have skills can come to the UK.
Although I've always wondered why it's in the interest of a lot of these countries to ship off their brightest and their best to another country.
Well, because some people from those countries want to come to the UK. I mean, that's the reality. And there are some skilled workers that we need. So I think there are some sort of arrangements, some agreements that can be struck. I don't think we're in a position to impose tariffs on particular countries. I just don't think that's the way that we operate. I'm not an expert on trade and tariffs.
Well, we don't have quite the economic might that the US has vis-a-vis Colombia. It's interesting in terms of, smashing the gangs. That more than 8,000 social media accounts linked to people smuggling were taken down following referrals from the National Crime Agency here in the last year. This has been confirmed in the last day. That's 40% up on the removals in 2023. Now, we know, again, a lot of this stuff is marketed online. Look, come to Britain. This is all it costs. This is where you get the boats. People are often told, this land of milk and honey and the benefits they'll get and how safe and easy the ride is. Often told horrific lies in those cases. But surely every single social media account that is cut down, taken down, is just replaced by 2 more, isn't it?
It is. It's a game of cat and mouse, but it's one way of disrupting the gangs. You can't not do it. I think it's something that has to be done. But of course, it's not the only answer, Julia. We know that there are so many different approaches that have to be taken. But clearly, if it makes it more difficult for the gangs to reach out to potential clients, then that's a good thing. If it disrupts or prolongs, their activities and makes it harder for them to do what they need to do, then it's necessary. And it's good that the National Crime Agency is now working with the tech companies to do that, because some of these adverts are just brazen. Some of them are lies. I think one is talking about, if you go across, you'll get a speedboat to take you across. Yeah. Another one is offering fake ID. So, it's one small brick in the wall against these gangs, I suppose. I wonder whether that's going to be enough. It should be done, but it's not necessarily and sufficient on its own, is it? Let's talk about what is happening on our streets, though. And particularly, goodness me, in the wake of the horrific Southport attack, details being exposed in court during the sentencing at Liverpool Crown Court last Thursday. I say there wasn't a dry eye in the house here, and I don't know any parent who wasn't just absolutely shaken to their core by the details of that horrific crime carried out by Iraq's or Uda Kabana. Government's still talking about, we need to cut down on people being able to buy knives online and double ID and the like. And an awful lot of people are saying, for goodness sake, you can just go to your parents' kitchen and get a knife out. And yet, we've got some stats out saying that teenagers are getting away with knife crime in London because fewer police officers feel confident using stop and search in case a complaint derails their career. This is actually from Commander Hayley Stewart, who leads on tackling knife crime in the Met, and said it's a top priority. She says, but the falls in the number of arrests for knife crimes are linked to fewer officers feeling confident because they fear complaints. Because, even with body cam, you'd think that would take away from a lot of that risk. I mean, how concerned are you about that? I'm very concerned about that. And Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, has talked about the fact that his officers are worried about using their powers, stop and search and other measures as well, because of the scrutiny they get, because of the complaints they'll get. If they are investigated, it could take months or even years. Yeah. That's a terrible thing to sort of hang over someone's career. So that's a real concern. And the impact you can see now, fewer stops and searches, fewer arrests, fewer knives potentially being taken off the streets. I mean, stop and search is just one tactic. It can be an effective tactic if it's targeted. It's not an effective tactic if it's used too widely and too broadly, because then what it does is just alienates a group of people who are particularly subject to
and it is all very well, white middle-class women saying, we should have more stop and search. Well, if it's not happening to you, I've done phone-ins before where, largely black and Asian men for saying, look, when you're stopped, every week, you're going to start feeling resentful if you're a law-abiding citizen. But I don't know what the alternative is. I mean, certainly in London, knife crime, you only have to look at, just literally, do a front page of the Evening Standard. Who are the victims of knife crime? Who are the people convicted? And we are largely talking about young black boys killing young black boys. Of course, the people who are most likely to be searched for knives are going to be young black men, young black boys.
It disproportionately affects the black community, not just with perpetrators, but also with victims as well.
Yeah, but there's no point searching, 56-year-old white women. We're not carrying knives. And then everyone says, oh, it's targeted. Well, yeah, of course it's targeted.
It's got to be targeted at the right people, and that involves intelligence, and then it's got to be done really, really respectfully by police.
100%. Yeah, there's a way of doing it, absolutely.
But it's just one thing. I mean, what I'm really concerned about is when someone is found with a knife, what happens? Yeah. And I think that is a teachable moment in a young person's life. That moment when they're caught with a knife, everyone should swoop in and understand why they're carrying that knife. Yeah. Is it because they're going to do something out of revenge? Is it because they're scared? Is it because they're part of a gang and they're being bullied or groomed in some way? What are the reasons why they're carrying that knife? That is a point where action needs to be taken within days. The statistics will tell you it's taking far too long to deal with knife offenders.
And we know a huge number. I mean, I think the majority of youngsters caught carrying knives aren't sent to jail, aren't actually properly punished, as we've been promised time and again by every single politician under the sun. And this brings us back to Axel Rudiker-Bana, the fact that he admitted carrying a knife on 10 occasions. He once stopped on a bus by police carrying a knife. Nothing happened. You know, no proper punishment for that, and then he was free on the streets to do what he did. In terms of what the government has announced, you know, like as I say, you know, let's make it a bit harder for someone to order some knives online from Amazon if they're 10 days out from their 18th birthday, for goodness sake. And that talks about taking down some, you know, tackling social media and some of the horrific violence that we see on social media and available on the internet. Does that even touch the sides of what needs to be done, given the obvious multi-agency failure to make sure that Axel Rudiker-Bana was not going to be able to carry out the killing that he did?
Making it harder for young people to get knives, and particularly some of the really deadly weapons online,
the massive big
one
machetes.
Thing that has to be done. Okay, it's not the answer. It's one approach. Dealing with the tech firms and getting them to take down some of the violent material, it's another aspect of it. But of course, it's not going to do. It's not going to do the job completely. Of course it isn't, because if you're a young person and you want to get hold of a knife, of course you can. You can go to a kitchen and get hold of one. So the failures in this case, we don't know about the parents' involvement and how much they really tried to get help. It seems as though they did to some point, but did they turn a blind eye? Yeah. Were they not curious enough? Were they scared of their teenage son? That's a possibility as well. What help was provided to them? Those are questions we don't have the answers to. The agencies, I fear that he was passed from one agency to another because he just didn't fit into one particular box.
And he didn't engage, apparently, so at which point they just don't bother carrying on. I mean, those are the very people you need to engage with.
In this, that I don't think the police were talking to the counter-terrorism police. I don't think the information was shared there. And I do think that the police probably stepped back when they shouldn't have done, when they should really have gone in harder, particularly when he was found for a second time with a knife. That was the second occasion, being convicted once of a knife crime, second occasion. That really is the moment to swoop in and take some tough action. Because if you do get a young person into the criminal justice system, you can take action. You can search their property, right? Yeah. You can start questioning those around them. You can put some conditions on what they do. Unless you get someone into the system and do that, it's very, very difficult.
Absolutely. And yet, and this is the frustration for so many people. And my God, the heart-wrenching awfulness that the families in Southport have had to live with is that while police were failing to take action against a youngster who'd called Childline and said, I want to kill people at my school. I want to kill. Who had a knife, been caught with it repeatedly, who made threats, he was obsessed with genocide and the like. I mean, the signs were bright red and they were neon and they were flashing for years. And yet police seem to be worried about, hurty words on Twitter and the like. And we know that now Bedfordshire Police and Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire Police, they've created a diversity, equality and inclusion reference guide for their officers and staff. This is what they spend their time doing. A 9-page document published online. And basically it's telling police not to use terms like black sheep or blacklisted in case it causes offence. You can't even say that someone should get a black mark against their name because that itself is using the word black in a negative way. Also told to use gender-neutral language, like talking about pregnant person rather than a pregnant woman, because there are no other people other than pregnant women, and the like. And just basically, saying there are more than two gender identities and realities. All of this stuff, this is the worry people have, that police spend too much time with this madness, policing words, too much time wearing rainbow lanyards at pride festivals, rather than, you know what, protecting us from the lunatics, the madmen and the bad men who are actually going to harm us and our children.
Well, let's not get carried away. This was a guide that I think is really ill-conceived, and Festus Akinbusoye, who's the former Black Police and Crime Commissioner of Bedfordshire himself, has raised questions about it. And this was produced by the force that he used to lead. But that's not to say, Julia, that police aren't out there doing a hard job. I would imagine most police officers will see this. They'll probably kind of roll their eyes, roll their eyeballs, and you know,
they'll probably be sent on a training course about it, wasting their time instead of policing.
I do think it's extraordinary, I have to say.
No, I see. I don't think it is. I think it's just the norm now, and that's what we'd like Trumpian policies to get rid of. This is the norm in private companies as well as the public sector, let alone policing now. Danny Shaw, we'll have to leave that. So appreciate your thoughts on all of this. I'm going to come back to Sam Armstrong in just a few moments. Going to take a quick break, then we're going to get to your calls. Love to hear your reaction to all of that conversation. Also, your thoughts on Donald Trump's policies. Do you support of the policies? What about declaring a border emergency? Would that work here? Would you make of a Donald Trump trip to the UK? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
What's the purpose of a strategy if it's not actually preventing? We need to strip it back, actually. We have inquiry upon inquiry, this failing, that failing, but what do we do post-inquiries? We just sit back on our laurels and we get on with our day until something else happens. It's shocking and disgusting and disturbing that actually so many parties were aware by this evil individual, but yet nobody actually took action. Early help, attendance, ECHPs. How many more prevent strategies that we're not preventing are we going to see in the future? We need to now take action.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. 11:51 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Sam Armstrong was with me. We're going to go to our calls just a few moments, but Sam, reaction to what Danny Shaw had to say, in particular in relation to like knife crime, and of course in the wake of the Axel Rudigbana sentencing, and just, you know, and this sort of this mealy-mouthed attempt that the government have got about, oh, we're going to tackle, you know, how to buy knives online, as if that's the problem.
Yeah, well, look, let's get something straight, right? Axel Rudigbana did not commit the atrocities he did because Amazon sells knives. He could have easily bought a knife in 6 days' time himself from Tesco's, or indeed just taken one from his parents, right? So let's just put that aside. But I think what is serious is the fact that this guy had repeatedly carried knives into school and was not punished for it. And we know that this happens time and time again, despite everything. The single biggest cause of violent death for young black men is knife crime in this country. If you care about black people, particularly young black people and men in this country, you have to care about sorting knife crime. And that means...
The mothers in those communities are desperate for these policies to be...
and that means stop and search. It is the only proven recipe for dealing with it. You can set up as many youth clubs as you want. You can set up as many community engagements as you'd like. No. Until you tell young black men who are, by and large, stabbing other young black men, that is the reality of the criminal statistics, that if you get caught with a knife, you are going to get serious punishment. Until that happens, you are going to see continually bloodshed on our streets. I've had enough of it. I've had enough of opening the newspapers every day in this city and seeing that another young black man has been stabbed.
I mean, exactly. It is just extraordinary. And again, and if it was white middle-class kids getting stabbed, then they would have done something about it. But that's what, in this case, you know, oh, the kids got something. Again, the refusal to sort of discuss the reality, and again, I'm absolutely convinced that Prevent would have been the 3 times that the Rudigbana was referred to Prevent, if he had been a white man, a white teenager, and he was talking about black genocide, and he turned it on its head. I'm telling you, they would have taken action. They would have taken action. They didn't, and I'm sure that that's the reason why. 11:53 is the time. Let's go to your phone calls now. Then 0344 499 1000. Sorry. Let's go to Andrew, who's in Hertfordshire. Andrew, talk to us about Donald Trump.
Yeah, fantastic. Great show. Well done. Look, and a really good last minutes. Really top drawer presentation of journalism. Look,
thanks, Dad.
No troubles. Look, Trump is going to lead a real good revolution in relation to politics because we will just look so pedestrian alongside him. So he's playing Starmer at the moment. He's doing what he wants. He's given the dog the bone. Starmer looks good. When he next picks up the phone and says, you know that Chagos thing, that's dead in the water. And these are the things that I want for you. And if you look at knife crime, you just talked about that and talked wonderfully about it. If you think about Trump, he had a problem with that deportation. He solved it in 2 golf holes.
He was like, that's if people don't know. He was on the golf course. The threat was made before he'd finished the golf game. It was sorted.
Yeah, and Starmer, he can do the same. He says 6 o'clock tonight, every mayor in 10 Downing Street. What I want from you is I want 500 stops of people who fit the profile on the streets every day, and you report to me. Every hospital must report every stabbing that goes into it. Anyone arrested, apply the Stockport principle. He's a lawyer, 5 years. The parents who've allowed the children on the street, aiding a child abandonment, aiding and abetting, make them wear a tag for every time. And then the mayors have to come out and act like Trump, act like a leader. Please do a good job. Please that stop your son are trying to save his life.
I mean, that's the thing. And again, look, we've seen in the past, targeting and abusive behaviour, and if it's done respectfully, if every body cams, get someone to video out. I've got no body cam. I don't want any police stopping without body cam working. I want proof of what has actually been said, what the exchange is. But at the end of the day, this is about saving lives, and it's and often about saving the lives of the young lads who are having having the search happen to them. Andrew, again, it's just a can-do attitude instead of always go, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. That's what we're getting from Trump at the moment, isn't it? Thank you so much for your call. Thank you for your lovely compliments. Much appreciated by the team. Jim is on the line. He's in Worcestershire. Hello, Jim.
Julia, yes, good morning to you. Donald Trump, I love the guy. I think from time to time he may look a bit gormless, but but he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, and his word he's using at the moment, which we need. He's ruthless.
Yeah.
And we have to be ruthless in this country.
Yeah. Well, just lead and be strong. I mean, that's what people seem to like about him. I mean, his policies are more popular in America than he is as a person. Most people voting, apart from the MAGA lot, weren't going, oh, I love him. I love this guy. I love everything about him. I wish he married my daughter. I mean, they're not thinking that. What they're thinking is like, he's going to get it done.
I like him for the right reasons, and that's the reason you say it. And he will get it done. And we should do the same. We need ruthlessness with our police. Where have the police gone? When I grew up as a kid, the police force was completely different, in my home city of Liverpool. Yeah. They were ruthless, actually. They knew how to use a baton. If there was any problems, they knew how to use them. But, it's interesting, isn't it? And he won't. He's looking forward to meeting Starmer, and he won't talk to Starmer by. Although they've had conversations, he won't really talk to him in the way he wants to talk to him. He wants to chastise Starmer, and he wants to do it eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah. But I think also, the contrast between America and Britain, not just economically, but I think on the issue, the migration issue, I think. It's just going to be so different. Well, we're going to be going down taking our economy down the chute with right. Net zero, and we're just going to sort of fiddling while Rome burns when it comes to crime and everything else, and the sort of cultural takeover of this country. There's stuff that Kemi Badenoch is very sensibly talking about as a Tory leader. I think Donald Trump is going to just be taking America in a completely different direction.
Yeah, and black people in this country being stabbed to death. I think if you, it's a terrible thing. Stop and search is a good thing. And if you said to the parents, the mothers and fathers of those black lads who have been knifed to death in this country, if you said, "Do you agree with stop and search?" and it might have saved your child's life, they would say yes immediately.
Yeah. The polling has been very clear, actually. A lot of, again, mums often representing, Afro-Caribbean communities in central, cities have said exactly that. Jim, thank you very much indeed for your phone call. Appreciate that. Sam Armstrong, again, it's this contrast, it's the can-do contrast. It's this idea that, this is a terrible thing. Axel Rudakabana, 14-year-olds and 12-year-olds knifing each other in broad daylight in our major cities. Whatever the issue is, just a sort of, phone theft, bag theft, there's just a sort of we'll have another inquiry, there's just no sense of urgency or a willingness to act. We know the government has incredible powers if they choose to use them, but they just never seem to choose to use them, except during lockdown.
Yeah, and the public have seen through it, and by the way, they're sick to their back teeth with it. And I think when you look at America, right, you've got Donald Trump, a man whose faults are very, very obvious. Yeah. But the American public are so sick of what they've seen.
That's how bad things have been.
They're prepared to give him a blank cheque to do exactly what he's now doing, and that's why he's so popular.
And I do think what's going to be interesting to watch is what's going to happen in European countries and elections coming forward, and what's going to happen at our next election with Nigel Farage and Reform, because we see in the polls taking over the Tories. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Up next, we are going to be talking to a former Israeli government spokesman about the ceasefire in Gaza. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, great to have your company. Great also to have commentator Sam Armstrong still with us, joining us for the whole show, with you all the way until 1 o'clock. Now, coming up in this hour, we're going to turn our attention to what's happening in the Middle East. Thousands of Palestinians have been returning to northern Gaza today after Israel and Hamas agreed that another round of hostages will be released this Thursday. We'll find out more details about the last 4 hostages, 4 Israeli female soldiers, what they have had to endure in their many months of captivity. Also, Donald Trump has proposed relocating as many as 1.5 million Gazans to neighbouring Jordan and Egypt in a bid to, he says, clean out the war-torn strip. How will that go down with Israel and indeed Hamas? Plus, we're going to talk about things closer to home as 4 million households in this country face council tax rises up to 5 times the legal 5% limit from April. They could be seeing 25% increases in their council tax. This as bankrupt local authorities use a legal loophole to plug those black holes in their finances. But I'm not quite sure who's got that spare. Quite a few £100 that it would end up being for many households. Plus, we'll be talking about the latest woke madness as woke Navy chiefs are renaming HMS Agincourt. Why, you might ask? Well, because they don't want to remind the French of their defeat to the English in the famous 1450 battle. Deep sigh, everybody. Deep sigh. Right, let's talk to Sam Armstrong, who's a commentator joining us today. We've been talking an awful lot about Donald Trump, but whether you're talking about the economy, whether you're talking about tackling migration, whether you're talking about what's going on in the Middle East, Ukraine, you name it, it always comes back to Donald Trump right now. The US economic and military might and his way of doing business is very much the news. The question we're asking people today is, after a poll suggested that British voters back many of Donald Trump's policies, including declaring a border emergency, how popular that might be here. What is people's reaction? Well, people have been calling in on 0344 499 1000, texting the word talk and their messages to 87222, and of course getting in touch at talkTV as well. Don't forget, of course, your calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1, standard network rate message. But Sam, Donald Trump, you are leader of the free world. You have influence on every single thing in the world. But his sort of can-do, get down to it, executive order, straight to business, done with this, done with that attitude. I could feel the frisson of excitement here in the UK. Do you think there's any chance that the UK might follow suit?
Yeah, have you noticed he's back yet? Have you noticed the difference? He has come back and he has shown what you can do if you're prepared to get tough, to get serious on big issues. And every single day he does this, puts the lie to that claim that some of these things they're really serious. These are really complicated issues. Yes. We can't solve this. Yes, you can. Now, look, these policies are exactly the kind of policies that people in this country want to see. It's called populism for a reason.
I never understand why populism is a dirty word.
People want you to do stuff. It is not a good thing as a politician to turn your face to the people, to lie to them, to tell them you're going to sort migration, and then never, ever, ever do anything about it. Yeah. And I don't care how many times Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell tell me it is. It isn't. No. Right. So, taking a breath, we could do many of these things here tomorrow. We have a huge problem with foreign national offenders in our prison systems.
Like 1 in 12 people who buy bars.
Out in our community. If you want to solve our prisons crisis, and we have got a prisons crisis, if you want to solve that without having to release thousands of criminals early, the simplest way to do that is to deport all of these foreign offenders. Why can't we do it? Because countries around the world aren't taking them back. Now, we could put massive tariffs on them. They're not small. They're not huge numbers we're asking them to take. So we could do that. We could cut off foreign aid. Yeah. We could take action against their leaders. We could stop them investing in the City of London. There is plenty that we could do to deal with this.
But the
truth is, our politicians don't care about migration. They think it's a low-status issue. They think it's an issue that affects slightly dirty white working class people.
They don't. And anyone concerned about it's just a racist and a bigot. Yeah.
We could solve it tomorrow. Let's do it.
If again, that's always the thing to me. If any government can solve anything, really, if they want to, if you're willing to do it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Right now, let's turn our attention to one of the other big issues, very much been in Donald Trump's inbox, and that is what to do about the Middle East. We're joined now by Elon Levy. He's a former Israeli government spokesman. A very good afternoon to you, Elon.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I was following a lot of your tweets and social media messages on Saturday when we saw, thank God, another 4 Israeli hostages released from their Hamas terrorist captors. And it just extraordinary scenes with those young women. I do want to come on to bigger policy issues, but can we just talk for a few moments about what happened on Saturday morning when these 4 young women, one of whom, she'd only just finished her training. She'd been at the military base for I think about 3 days before she was taken hostage. When they were paraded by Hamas fighters who've suddenly miraculously found that they do have a set of uniforms all of a sudden in their balaclavas, and these young women were paraded like a sort of Hunger Games style before a baying mob of Palestinian men. What did you make of that handover?
Incredible relief to get 4 hostages out alive. The doctors are saying that their condition is emotionally and medically complicated, but they're alive. But there was shock in Israel, of course, as you say, at that Hunger Games-like reception. 15 months into the war, the Hamas regime in Gaza is very much in control. Yeah. And when it wants its jihadi fighters to put on their masks and their guns and to go on parade and to parade hostages through the streets, they are able to do that. They even forced the Red Cross to take part in this macabre signing ceremony in front of a banner threatening the destruction of the state of Israel. And so for Israelis, first of all, they were incredibly moved to see the 4 women standing on stage and waving in a show of defiance, saying, we will not be beaten. But it was a reminder
by the way,
of two things.
People on social media were saying, oh, well, look, they look perfectly healthy and happy. They've not been starved. It was kind of... They've probably just been, they've just been hanging out at a youth club as opposed to hiding in tunnels and being starved on occasion.
And Hamas gave them certificates of completion to try to make it look like they'd been on summer camp. But we know from the previous hostage release that hostages were being drugged, in fact, by Hamas on tranquilizers to alter their appearance and to make them appear, even being force-fed before they're released, to make them appear healthier than they actually are. But here's the point. Israelis saw 2 things. First of all, we're facing psychopaths. We are dealing with lunatics, and this is an evil regime, and we have to rescue the hostages from their clutches. And 2, the Gaza Hamas regime cannot be allowed to continue to govern Gaza, because as far as we're concerned, it's a year after 9/11, and we can see Afghanistan from our windows. Gaza is that close to people's homes in Israel, and Hamas is threatening to do October 7th again and again and again until we're all dead.
They've made that very clear. Apologies to everyone. The sound of the police siren behind Elon there. But this is the interesting thing, is that, the people, especially on Holocaust Memorial Day today, when we talked to the great-grandson of a survivor from Auschwitz, about how so many lies are being told, not just about the Holocaust in the 1940s of Jews, but about what happened on October the 7th, despite all the footage that was put out by Hamas itself, joyfully by them, proudly by them, and people are still denying what happened then. People are denying what's happened to these hostages, including these young women. Again, despite there being a video of their capture, and the women were paraded, it was fascinating, in military uniforms, clearly not theirs, didn't fit them, but they weren't captured in military uniform, they were captured in their pyjamas. Because again, we know Hamas put a video out of their capture, bloodied, beaten, terrified, sitting a bunch of very young women. I've got a child this age. I really felt it when I saw that video footage, talking about them as sabaya, meaning sex slaves. And now, look, we haven't had too much detail about what's happened to a lot of the hostages, and we know the reason for that, isn't it? It's about hoping that we don't. It's to save the distress of many of the families who've still got hostages held captive, but also to just try not to do anything to stop more hostage releases. But what we have learned about these young women, the last women to come out, is that one was shot in the leg. She's still got a bullet in her leg, not given any treatment. We know that Emily Damari, she'd lost 2 fingers, wasn't treated, still bandaged after 15 months. They were routinely starved. One, yes, indeed, that's the signal of defiance.
Iconic.
But one, women talking about being held in a tunnel. One of the young women said she was held in a tunnel in the dark on her own for she doesn't know how long. And then when she was reunited with the other young women, she said, are we alive? Are we actually still alive? She didn't know. And then people are talking so glibly about their time. Well, oh, look, they look well fed. They must be okay.
Yeah, Israelis are appalled and shocked by the level of denial around the world. I remember at the beginning of the war, Israel made the very difficult decision to screen 40 minutes of the atrocity footage to journalists because we were seeing what I called a Holocaust denial-like phenomenon in real time. First, people celebrated Hamas's atrocities. Then when they realized how awful they were, they started covering them up, and now people are downplaying the horrors that the hostages are enduring in Gaza. But it's precisely because we know how horrific those conditions are that Israel has agreed to this ransom. It's not a hostage deal. If someone abducts your daughter and demands a price to get her back, it's a ransom. And Israel is paying a ransom to the kidnappers. We are releasing hundreds of convicted terrorists, including the people behind suicide bombings, people who've committed terror attacks before, people we know are going to try to commit terror attacks in future. But we still have 90 hostages trapped in the dungeons of Gaza, and we need to get them out. And Israelis feel look, just days after October 7th, people started tearing down posters of hostages in cities like London. And that dehumanization, that basic lack of sympathy or empathy has been very hard for people in Israel to see around the world.
It's been very hard for those of us in this country with some semblance of morality for us to watch our fellow Brits doing exactly the same. I mean, especially even the Bibas children, tiny little children, a child that's celebrated for the love of God, we hope has marked first and second birthdays and is still alive, but we still don't know. We've got more hostage release, the fifth female soldier being released later this week. We hope some people who are unwell, hoping to get more out. But there is still this concern that only that maybe a few dozen of the people who are still held hostage are still alive. That's the concern.
We know that of the 90 hostages who are still trapped in Gaza, at least 35 have been confirmed dead. Either they were murdered on October 7th and Hamas abducted their bodies, or they were since executed in captivity. In fact, we're expecting to get another 26 hostages out as part of this stage of the ransom deal. According to information in the Israeli media, Hamas has communicated to Israel, 8 of those are dead. We're going to get 8 bodies, and we don't know who they are. We don't know if we're getting back the 2 little Bibas children alive, or whether the country is going to receive 2 little coffins, because those 2 children, aged 4 and 9 months when they were abducted, were executed by jihadi terrorists in Hamas captivity. We're expecting on Thursday to receive another 3 hostages, including 1 civilian Hamas has been refusing to release just yet. But this is just stage 1 of the ransom deal, to get 33 hostages. At the end of it, there will still be another 60 hostages trapped in Gaza. And that's when the really difficult discussions take place over stage 2. The problem being, Hamas wants a full Israeli withdrawal that leaves Hamas in power, free to plan the next invasion on October 7th.
Is the issue.
And Israel's saying that's a non-starter.
And this is the key issue, isn't it? And we've seen in the last 24 hours people in Gaza being able to return to northern Gaza, to, well, not their homes, to where their homes used to be, realistically. That after Hamas finally, again, having lied, having reneged on part of the deal, the clear stages about what they have to do about giving the names of the next set of hostages who will be released and their status. Donald Trump has suggested over the weekend, a complete clear out of Gaza. Why doesn't Egypt? Why doesn't Jordan? Why don't they take these Palestinian refugees? Half of the Jordanian population is of Palestinian heritage. Many were refugees from previous conflicts. Why don't we just basically clear out Gaza and kind of start again? What do you make of that?
Well, Jordan and Egypt have already shot down President Trump's suggestion, and they've done that because they know that historically countries that have taken in large populations of Palestinians developed an internal extremism problem that undermined their domestic stability, right? Like Lebanon, like Jordan as well, back in the 70s. But President Trump does put his finger on a very real problem, and that's this. Hamas is still the government of Gaza. The Hamas jihadi regime is still in control. And it is impossible for Gaza to be rebuilt if its government is still saying that Israel should be destroyed. As long as Hamas remains the government of Gaza, it is impossible to rebuild Gaza without rebuilding Hamas.
No, and there should be no
Western
government, and I'd say no Arab government either, no Western government certainly, should be contributing a single penny while Hamas is still in charge. However, what are the alternatives? People talk about Fatah or they talk about Palestinian Authority, but there is no moderate Palestinian leadership. We've seen senior figures of the Palestinian Authority welcoming back terrorists released from Israeli jails.
You're right. The Palestinian Authority never condemned October 7th. The Palestinian Authority still has a policy. It pays salaries to terrorists in Israeli jails, salaries that are pegged to how many people you killed. It's called the Pay for Slay program. And they've said that they'll use their last dollar on that program. We do not think that this is a moderate leadership that is committed for peace. We think that Gaza deserves a government that is committed to peace rather than a forever war against Israel. And here's the critical point. World leaders have said over and over that Hamas can have no role in the future government of Gaza, but it's still in control, as we saw from the images of them parading the hostages. Yeah. And so the question now is, you want a ceasefire, you want Israel to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Are you happy for the Hamas terror regime that did October 7th, that's threatening to do it again, to continue governing Gaza? Because that's the default mode, unless we see pressure. Unless we see pressure on Hamas and its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran. Yeah. Hamas has to let the hostages go, it has to lay down its arms, and it has to let everyone rebuild peacefully and put this war behind us.
Are you hopeful that under Donald Trump's leadership in the States with his Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's made it very clear, he won't rest until Hamas is completely destroyed, that they will stand firm on this issue?
It's not clear at the moment. On the one hand, the Trump administration has figures who have been extremely sympathetic and favourable to Israel, but there have also been voices, including from the Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, that have been less than encouraging. Let's remember, Trump has promised to support Israel going forward, but he's also committed to ending wars. Now, we don't want this war, okay? We want our men on the front to come home. We just know that you can't end a war when you freeze it in place with the enemy that started the war threatening to resume it at a time of their choosing.
And so no Western government, certainly not America, certainly not Britain, would ever agree to do that ourselves. So why would we expect it of Israel? It's the thing that always blows my mind. Elon Levy, really appreciate you joining us, former Israeli government spokesman there. Sam Armstrong, listening to all of that.
Well, that's the sad reality, which is we have just finished this war for now, but we know that it is likely...
We've paused it.
It is likely to continue, and it's likely to come back just as bad before. That's not my words. That's the words of Hamas. Hamas are really clear. They remain as devoted as ever to killing each and every Jew that happens to live in Israel.
And then they're coming for everyone who's not Jewish as well, by the way. Just people seem to think that they're just first on their list.
They've never discriminated. They're just as happy to kill babies, just as happy to kidnap young girls as they are soldiers. Right? This is not a discriminatory organisation. Maybe that's why the left loves them, because they kidnap and kill, murder and rape everyone they can get their hands on.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it? Again, it's one of the things that absolutely blows my mind. It really does. In the last 15 months is that there are just times when there's an obvious side to it, and the ridiculous tweets and things I get from people going, oh, you vile this, you vile that, you genocide defender. There's not a genocide going on in Gaza. The British Army has never had such a low ratio. It's awful that any child or any innocent person should die in a war. Of course it is, but no, British government has never sent our own forces to war with the same sort of restrictions that the Israelis have. Accidents happen, bad things happen, some bad people do some bad things. I accept all of that. Hamas, literally, everything about them is evil, what they're doing to the Palestinian people. But again, I don't know what the solution is, because we cannot have Hamas in charge. Don't want Fatah in charge, don't want the Palestinian Authority in charge, unless you have like the UN in charge. But UNRWA, funded by the UN, has been basically leading the outrageous propaganda, anti-Jewish propaganda that is going on in Gazan schools for the last 20 years. So I'm not entirely sure what the solution there is. I mean, maybe Donald Trump's idea is the right one. But as you say, Jordan and Egypt, they don't want the people of Gaza either. What does that tell you? But there we are. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. Also love your calls, your thoughts on Donald Trump, not just on the Middle East, but as we've been talking about, this new poll suggested that Brits actually back many of Donald Trump's policies. What would you like Keir Starmer to copy that Donald Trump has done? My list is very long. What's on yours? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Government getting tough, you can't buy a knife unless you're 18, right? What about prevent? What about the fact this guy was referred 3 times to prevent? What about the fact he was found 10 times at school carrying a knife? What about the absolute failures of all the authorities, child services, prevent, the local police? What about those failures? And then they suppressed the truth for as long as they possibly could. And in fact, because of the guilty plea, there's a lot more would have come out in the court case. But that's by the by, perhaps for now. Government getting tough, you can't buy a knife unless you're...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Do get in touch, give us a call, 0344 499 1000 on anything we're talking about today, but particularly British voters, according to a new poll, backing many of Donald Trump's policies, including the declaration of a border emergency. I'm wondering what policies you'd like us to emulate here that Donald Trump has brought about. Let's go to some of the messages. Well, this is a Samuel. Have you been texting in, Sam?
I have
Samuel says Trump is a man of action and is doing what is necessary to get the job done. In the meantime, in the UK, people are getting poorer and have to subsidise young men who broke into the country illegally. In other words, subsidise criminals. I mean, yep. Jean says, if people agree with Trump, then why the hell did they vote for Starmer? They didn't, Jean. They didn't. They've got a mandate, democratically elected, never ever question that. But at the end of the day, no more people voted for Keir Starmer last July than they'd voted for Jeremy Corbyn. For what happened was millions of I think it was about 7 million, wasn't it, Tory voters didn't vote Tory. They either voted for reform or they just didn't vote at all. Very similar, actually, what's interesting to what happened in America. 11 million Democrats from 2020 did not vote in 2024. We don't know what but they didn't vote. They didn't vote Democrat. Donald Trump's vote was pretty much the same as in 2020. Which is what is so interesting, that actually, a lot of times government get in now because people are disillusioned with the previous government. But I think an awful lot of people who didn't like Trump in America were going, yeah, but I'll take it. I mean, the stuff he's done, I mean, the woke stuff, dealing with the whole deportation issue, kickstarting the economy, getting rid of the whole green agenda, blob stuff, World Health Organization. I mean, literally, I'm watching the stuff go tick, 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 every single thing. Helen says, Trump and his policies have my 100% backing. Britain needs a Trump instead of Stalin. Ain't that the truth? Brian says, after years of rubbish Western leadership, it's extraordinary watching this Trump presidency unfold. Shameful what has been allowed to happen to many countries under weak, self-loathing leadership. That is so true, isn't it, Sam? You touched on that earlier.
Yeah, and look, I think you see it in the votes, right? You saw it with the Tories, you saw it with the Democrats. If you keep spending 5 years tinkering, saying you're going to do stuff and then not quite doing it...
But also that your country's a terrible country.
If you're so apathetic, don't be surprised when the voters are apathetic about you and don't bother to come out and vote for you.
Absolutely. David says, I 100% agree. Looking at the state of once proud working class communities, we are in dire trouble. We have been abandoned. Diane says, we've been asking for it for years. They make false commitments for power and then do nothing. Mark says he'd get my vote, and with Labour making themselves totally unelectable, he says so will reform. Lee says, when Trump has done his second term, can we borrow him over here in Britain, since nobody here has the balls to get things that are needed done. Sheila says, I agree with President Trump's policies. You should put the country you govern first and its people. I mean, it's just going on and on. There's so many messages being very positive. And I don't think any of those people are going, oh, I'm sure he's a lovely human being. I mean, he's quite amusing, Donald Trump. Yeah. I think a lot of things he's done over here, I'm not happy with. I don't like the pardoning of the January 6th rioters, including people who viciously, violently attack police officers who it's simply a matter of luck that they're still alive. I think that's a big mistake. And that's only got 20% support in America, that policy. But in terms of the sort of the can-do, we talked about this earlier, the can-do attitude, the get-it-done attitude, we've always had this thing, like the Tories, they say all the right things on immigration, on crime, on you name it, but they didn't really do it. They often did the exact opposite. I mean, Boris Johnson, literally, we're going to control immigration. We're going to literally open up our country to anybody who wants to come from the rest of the world. Legally, it wasn't even a surprise. But there doesn't seem to be any will to get anything done. This lot, Keir Starmer, they don't even pretend there's a will.
Yeah, look, this is government by the who cares the least, right? It really is. But look, I think there has been this kind of general shift on how Donald Trump is seen in this country. I mean, first term of Donald Trump, in parts of the media, and I'll come back to that, but people here were thinking he's mad, he's bizarre, etc. But we've now gone on another 8 years, and the cause, the need, the justification for Donald Trump is so much so that I think even the media are turning around and saying, do you know what, he's got something. There's no claims now of a Russian interference. There's no claims now that he cheated or
haven't had the big demonstrations of women wearing those pink pussy hats.
And there's no suggestion that Donald Trump won't be welcomed into the UK as before. Do you remember last time where John Bercow, Sadiq Khan said, no, he's not welcome here, whereas now you've got leftists falling over themselves to welcome him in. And why? Because there is a widespread recognition that, no, 2016, whether with Trump or with Brexit, no, that wasn't a blip. That wasn't a freak accident. No, that was a reflection of the fact that the public across the Western world are fed up of politicians promising the world, delivering nothing, and consigning them to ever further decline while lecturing them about how wrong they are.
Who's the equivalent of Donald Trump here? Because many are saying it's Nigel Farage. They definitely don't think it's Keir Starmer. They don't think it's Kemi Badenoch. You I know worked with Robert Jenrick, and now the Shadow Justice Secretary, on his leadership campaign. Is it Robert Jenrick? Because you look at the polls, the dynamic movement is is reform now?
Well, look, Kemi's in early days, and I think it'd be wrong to judge us straight away. But there's no doubt that the big issue for the Tory party is how it deals with reform, how it gets on top of that. Because if they don't, and if Lord Frost said this last week in an interview, he said if they don't deal with this, what you're going to have is a situation in which two parties with 20 to 25% in the polls, maybe a little bit higher, but not much, going into the election against a Labour Party with 30 to 35% in the polls. The net result will be Keir Starmer walks back in
with another landslide.
With another landslide majority. That's the way our system is set up. It's not a presidential system like the US. That's the system we've got, and you've got to work with it. And my fear is, just in terms of contrast between us with this slow, ever further decline, and America with a booming economy really going great guns, we are just going to look like the sick man, not just of Europe, but the Western world once more.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we'll take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to economists about, what is happening with our economy. Because Rachel Reeves is going to get a grip of all our economic problems. Meanwhile, your council tax is going up, your national insurance is going up, buildings ain't going up, and a third runway at Heathrow is probably never going to go up either. We'll talk about all of that up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:34 is the time. Sam Armstrong's still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and our next guest is Warwick Lightfoot. He's an economist and former Conservative government advisor. Very good afternoon to you, Warwick.
Afternoon, nice to see you.
Thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the economy, because Rachel Reeves was doing a round of media interviews on the Sunday shows yesterday, and she was talking about having come back from Davos, that basically she needs to get a grip of economic problems in this country. Lots of talk of whether there be a third runway at Heathrow, indeed other runways at Gatwick and Luton and elsewhere, and getting the country moving. Is there any evidence at all that that's going to happen?
Well, I'm sorry, it's going the other direction. It's people laying people off, people worried about jobs, people not spending their savings because they're worried about taxes going up, and it's people preparing for a higher minimum wage, higher national insurance, and every survey of business, consumer, investor, finance director opinion is going the wrong way.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Is we're constantly told, no, we've steadied the economy, everything's fine, and yet we've got a situation where companies are saying not only are we laying people off, we're going to hire fewer people, we are going to give lower wage increases, and we're kind of just going to sit tight because we just don't trust the economy is going to boom. We've got, high street stores closing down for sale. I mean, it's amazing. You walk along, even Oxford Street in London, I mean, the biggest, famous shopping street in London, and the stores that are popping up on short leases, the sort of sweet stores rather than big stores, department stores pretty much other than John Lewis all closed down. It just feels, you can feel the sort of the deterioration. A lot of people might be walking along, barely anyone's got a shopping bag, which I think is always a giveaway. We've now got the likes of James Dyson. So James Dyson, one of our most successful entrepreneurs and inventors, he's accused the Chancellor of vindictiveness by changing inheritance tax rules and said that family businesses employing 14 million people in this country were being fleeced. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, the thing isn't just about taxation of businesses and farmers. It's actually having a tax in our tax system that's beyond its sell-by date. Other countries, Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, and for most people, America, have actually got rid of inheritance tax. And I think it has no place. It's the double taxation of savings income. It's a clumsy thing. It's very salient. People notice it. It gets up people's noses. They don't like it. And it causes a lot of worry. And it is very difficult for a company like the one that Sir James has got to make provision for it and not actually lose a whole lot of their capital stock.
Well, yeah, indeed. It's a very unpopular, people refer to it as death taxes. Now, of course, the tax doesn't fall on the person who's died. The tax falls on usually, the children who are inheriting. Tax doesn't fall on the husband or wife. But this has definitely come to the fore with the farmers and how that will break up family businesses and how much we rely on those family farms to produce, more than half of our agricultural goods that hit our supermarket shelves that we buy. But I did notice over the weekend, the farmers' demonstrations. They were now calling, a lot of these groups were now calling, for an end to inheritance tax across the board. Nevertheless, that does bring in money. I certainly think that the high rate it's at is self-defeating because we know the very rich don't pay inheritance tax. Everything's in a trust. It's all dealt with. It's overseas. It's wherever. All completely legally, but they don't actually pay it. So actually, it's successful sort of middle-class families who've got a home, got a big mortgage. They're the ones who end up paying it. You can see where I'm going here with this, But the reality is that this was supposed to be a tax on the very wealthy. The very wealthy don't pay it, but a lot of people who really don't consider themselves very wealthy, who've worked very hard for their money, are paying it. Do you think they should get rid of it altogether or cut it down to such a level that it's not worth avoiding?
It's time to let go of it. But what I just say is the problem Rachel Reeves got, she has stabilised the public finances. But how's she done it? She's put up taxes, she's put up borrowing, she's put up spending, and the spending is simply too high to be comfortably financed by the British economy, whichever way you try to do it.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
But the issue is this government has said they don't want to do austerity. They criticised the Cameron and Osborne government for doing that in the 2010s. They can't borrow. Well, they can borrow a bit more. They can't borrow much more because you'll be in proper Liz Truss territory, even which we're already in with the spiralling debt costs. But then they're saying, well, she's saying, they have to balance the books, the fiscal rules. We could look at more tax rises. But as we've seen from the tax rise we've already had from Rachel Reeves pre the budget and indeed in the budget, is that actually she tends to go for the worst ones. I mean, if you're going to raise any tax at all, raising the tax on jobs, national insurance, would be the crazy. I mean, that's the last one you'd do, but that's the first one she did.
Yeah, economists would say she's managed to aggravate the worst deadweight aspects of the tax system.
Yeah.
The national insurance is the worst one. The double taxation of savings is the next one. I think they're going to have to address the spending. And we've got a level of spending now running about 45% of national income. And we know historically the UK economy finds it difficult to finance public spending running more than about 41 to 42% of national income. If you try to sustain that, you burn your fingers.
Yeah, but again, these figures are still absolutely extraordinary. And again, they're talking about tackling, benefit fraud. I think there's extra $4 billion they say they'll save on that. Well, they won't, because we know they won't tackle this issue. Efficiency savings, Tories have been talking about that for the last 14 years as well. We never actually see those efficiency savings. Indeed, we've seen the public sector get bigger in that time. They're not even willing to get people to turn up to their desks in Whitehall. So I'm not quite sure why anyone would have any expectation they can do any of those other things.
But what you're now beginning to see happen is this very high ratio of public spending actively crowding out the private sector. And this is the position we were in 50 years ago. And my own economics tutor published a book with a colleague. It became known as the Bacon-Eltis thesis of crowding out through the public sector being so big that the tax burden undermined the private sector to pay the bill. Yeah. And that's where we are now.
Yeah, and indeed, private sector not being able. For instance, there's good calls for the public sector to be given help, like the NHS and elsewhere, to be given help, extra funding to pay the extra cost of the minimum wage and national insurance employer contributions. But of course, but don't worry, the private sector will be able to take that hit. I mean, and just simply not understanding how things work. I mean, just finally, you worked as an advisor for 3 different chancellors: Nigel Lawson, John Major, and Norman Lamont over a few years. What do you think they would do if they were in charge right now?
I certainly think Nigel Lawson and Norman Lamont would look seriously about cutting spending. I think John Major would have probably gone for a mixture of some cuts to spending and some big increases in tax. Remember, the autumn statement in 1992 had some very big increases in taxation. I think it was a mistake. I think it was a political mistake, and I didn't think it did the economy much good either. But I know that all 3 of them will be very, very concerned about the borrowing. In a funny way, I'm slightly less concerned about the borrowing than some people are, because the key thing is how much you spend. How you finance it is a secondary issue. It's the spending that you're doing.
Well, except, of course, the more you borrow, the more you're spending on interest. You haven't got money to spend on other things. I mean, we spend more servicing the interest on our debt than we do on education and defence and things.
Yes, I mean, the good thing about the borrowing and that debt service charge is that it exposes the real resource cost of the spending.
Right.
Because there is a real cost to spending, and people kid themselves that there isn't.
Yeah.
And when you see the cost of those debts, it tells you in your face that there is one.
Yeah. And again, it's all being paid for by taxpayers now or taxpayers in the future, and it has to be paid for. Warwick Lightfoot, economist, former Conservative government advisor, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Sam Armstrong, I want to bring you back in on this. I mean, and it's not just, inheritance tax and other taxes that, nationally imposed. It's also council tax. We've got some news today that some councils, particularly the Birminghams and others, I'm very surprised to have Maidenhead, Windsor and Maidenhead Council are looking at exploring this little loophole, which means that bankrupt councils who are doing incredibly badly, and again, how did that happen? Because if some are and some aren't, surely management must come into it, are looking at 5 times the rate of actual increase in council tax than is legally allowed. That's 5%. Looking at 25% increase in council tax. That is hundreds of pounds.
Yeah, and look, more than that, Angela Rayner is changing the law to punish councils that put up their rates only a small amount in future, because there's been this really annoying thing where Conservative councils keep council tax low and Labour councils are having to put it up so much faster, have to. So she's going to change the law to make everyone equal. No. Look, this is a government that is now beginning to run out of taxes it can claim only affects other people. Yeah. We have now reached the point where, in order for Labour to put up taxes, it's going to hit real people, council tax, a tax that everybody pays.
Well, it is. I mean, all these taxes, national insurance, contribution from employers hits employees.
It does, but they try and hide it. But they can't even do that now, and that's the issue. The government spending in this country has never been higher. It has never been higher. Government taxes have never been higher. Unless we're prepared to cut spending and cut it radically, we are going to continue this path of decline. The single fastest place to make that cuts, the number of people in work age who are claiming benefits because they say they have sickness, particularly mental health sickness.
Millions.
It is 63 billion. It's more than we spend on not on the NHS, but on education, on defence, on debt interest. That is where the big cuts are there to be taken. So far, there is not a scintilla of evidence that this government is prepared to take the kind of tough choices it needs.
Not at all. I mean, the Tories didn't do it. The idea that Labour are going to do it, and everyone's going to say, and then the BBC will interview someone and it'll be someone who said they can't make ends meet and how ill they are, and it'll be a woman who's got arms the size of tree trunks, saying that she has to miss meals. I mean, that's and then everyone go, oh, isn't this awful? And then they'll backtrack on it. And you know that's what's going to happen. There we are. 12:45 is the time. More from Sam Armstrong, more from me as well. Up next, we're going to be talking about defence spending. Is the government ever going to increase defence spending to the level that Donald Trump would like? And also woke Navy bosses worried about the French being upset by the name of one of our submarines. I kid you not. We're going to talk to the brilliant Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry about that. Up next, this is Talk.
Government getting tough, you can't buy a knife unless you're 18, right? What about prevent? What about the fact this guy was referred 3 times to prevent? What about the fact he was found 10 times at school carrying a knife? What about the absolute failures of all the authorities, child services, prevent, the local police? What about those failures? And then they suppressed the truth for as long as they possibly could. And in fact, because of the guilty plea, there's a lot more would have come out in the court case, but that's by the by, perhaps for now. Labour want to reorganise the structure of local government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. Sam Armstrong's still with me as well. Delighted to be joined now by Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, CBE. He's a former Royal Navy commander, but I have an awful feeling, Chris, that there's going to be smoke coming out of your ears or steam coming out of your ears when you talk about this story today. Woke Navy chiefs want to rename one of our ships, submarines, HMS Agincourt, to avoid upsetting the French. It turns out that it being called HMS Agincourt after the 14-15 victory is upsetting the French, they think, and they want to change its name. What do you make of that, Dr. Parry?
Well, there's no indication the French are upset, even they're not that wet. This is basically an attempt to erase our history. I think probably the army at Agincourt wasn't diverse enough. That is the problem. And this is absolutely ridiculous. It won't be the Navy chiefs doing this. This will be political pressure from this regime that we have at the moment. Yeah. And it's ridiculous. I mean,
It's ridiculous that anyone even had a nanosecond's thought about this. The fact that it's actually gone through various memos and committees is mind-blowing. Do they not have anything better to do when we've got 2 wars ongoing right now?
No, I mean, the French aren't going to rename the Gare Austerlitz because they might offend the Austro-Hungarians, are they? And what's next? Trafalgar Square, Waterloo?
Don't give them ideas, Chris, for the love of God. Seriously, it's the sort of thing. But this is the thing. It's the idea that, again, you have to whitewash the past because someone will be offended. But I mean, by the way, yes, there were battles. We've been at war with France many occasions. We also rescued France from the Nazis, in the 40s. You're welcome. I don't think we've got anything to be ashamed or embarrassed about in our past. Our past is our past. It is what it is. And this is all part of the taking down statues of someone who was related to someone who owned slave ships. And it's a very strange sort of Stalinist style year zero, blocking people out of photographs, pretending they never existed sort of policy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, year zero starts on 4th of July last year, as far as Labour is concerned. I mean, we have to understand that fighting forces rely on their traditions and to actually give you morale in combat and things like that. And if we start messing around with this sort of thing, then you're going to find we're going to deplete and degrade our armed forces. There's no question about that. The minute, I'm sure, the Navy chiefs are as angry as I am about this, to tell you the truth. I mean, Achilles, oddly enough, of course, was killed by Paris in the Trojan Wars. So it's even worse.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. That said, we did have, what was it, RAF chiefs, didn't we? Basically, it's recruiting and choosing pilots to be trained up as jet fighter pilots. They were just, can't have any more white, straight men. We need to have people of colour and trans and goodness knows what, women. I mean, the obsession that the very people you'd think should only be worrying about the bottom line and are we a fit fighting force, their obsession with wokery is terrifying. We've seen in America Donald Trump going, right, that's it, none of this nonsense. The government only recognises 2 genders because that's all there are, trying to get all of this stuff out of the military. Are you hopeful at all that this might happen here, whether under this government or any future government?
Well, Julia, I'm not allowed to lecture at the Defence Academy because I have views similar to Pete Hegseth about the need for a warrior class and to project a fighting culture. I've been banned from actually speaking because because it upsets people.
Because you think that the military should be there as a fighting force and a defensive force and nothing else?
No, it should be there basically to deter our enemies, fight the Queen's enemies and promote our interests. That's what we're here for. We're not some sort of social experiment. I don't believe that the armed forces should reflect society. No. If we did, we'd end up with all the drug dealers and criminals as well. Yeah. It has to reflect the best in society because we're playing at international level. Yeah. That's what I used to tell my sailors and Marines. You play at international level, you're as good as any England footballer and you've got to perform like that. Well, better than England footballers, let's face it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is extraordinary that anyone thinks anything different, isn't it? What do you make of Donald Trump's demands, again, repeated the weekend, about Western allies in NATO paying more of their percentage of their GDP on defence? Because a lot of concern that, we're not even going to be looking at in this country raising our spending from, 2.3% up to even 2.5%, let alone the 3% or the 5% that Donald Trump has thrown out, even though America doesn't spend that much of its GDP as a percentage of its GDP. That may not even happen until 2032. That is a couple of election cycles away. Do we need to be spending more money now? Is Donald Trump right? And is it about how much we spend or is it about what we spend it on?
Yeah, that's the critical point, Julia. It's not how much we spend, it's what we spend it on. Now, we are facing a clear and present danger from strategic enemies right now, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And if we spend money today, it won't have any effect for a number of years yet. Now, you're absolutely right. It's not what you spend, but bear in mind, during the Cold War, we spent 5.2% of GDP on defence. Yeah. It's less than 2% at the moment. If you want to get Europe up to the same level of combating Russia without the Americans, it takes about $500 billion euros.
Ouch.
And that's what the EU has said that they need to spend, but they want to actually finance that with debt. And they've proposed that to our government. It's absolutely ludicrous. We are transmitting to our enemies that they can do exactly what they want around the world, and frankly, we don't mind. You know, the first duty of government is to defend this country and its interests, and yet, as Sam said just now, you know, we spend over 20% on welfare and the NHS, less than 10% on defence.
And especially in such a dangerous and difficult world with the terrorism threat, Russia, China and elsewhere, you know, that we should be taking this seriously, because if and when we do end up in a conflict situation, we're going to have to spend a hell of a lot more. It's going to cost an awful lot more. We're not going to be prepared for it. But we seem to be just sort of blithely gliding through, because spending a lot of money on the military isn't very popular. You know, people will say, well, that's X number of nurses, and we may not end up needing that particular aircraft carrier. But when you need it, you need it.
Yeah, and also, if you don't get your defence right, Julia, you don't get to make choices about nurses, schools, hospitals and the rest. Ask the Ukrainians about that.
Very, very good point. Always so good to talk to you. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parris, CBE, former Royal Navy Commander. Thank you for that. Sam Armstrong listening to that. I mean, look, there's a trade-off. Governments have to make choices. To govern is to choose. And if you spend money on, you know, billions more on defence, that's billions you don't have to spend on the NHS or paying off some debt. That is an issue. But do you think that actually defence needs to be a much higher priority?
Yes, I do, and I'll tell you for why. Because I think the world is getting dramatically more dangerous, and it's getting more dangerous quickly. You only have to look at the events over the last few years to realise that assumption we made after the Cold War, that the end of history was here, that everything was peaceful, is mad, and it's for the birds. And we are seeing a time of history in which your capacity to get stuff done, your capacity to deliver for your own country, is directly related to the extent of which you can force what you want to go through. Donald Trump has just proved that, right? So we should be investing in this, because
even down to the ceasefire deal, which would not have happened without the knowledge that Trump was coming in, working behind the scenes with the Biden administration, and that threat, all hell's going to break loose unless you return
Hamas
hostages.
did that deal for one reason, because they worried about American bombs getting dropped upon them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going to read one more message that's come in about British voters backing many of Donald Trump's policies, according to a new poll, especially about including declaring a border emergency. Janice says it's almost bizarre to see a leader going straight into action, doing what they promised, and doing it for the betterment of his own people. A complete contrast to what we have here in Britain. I mean, amen to that. Ian Collins is here right now to tell us what's happening on his show.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, because we are going to pick up on that very point. I mean, the Columbia story as well as the various others. I mean, it's genius. Its simplicity is just beautiful. Here's some bad people. Take these bad people back. No, we're not going to do that. Fine, 25% tariffs.
For 50% to do it. But what I love is it all happened while he was playing golf.
I know. All of this was decided
hadn't even finished his golf game.
It wasn't hard to work out.
These are really, really simple. It's like using that power. And I don't know whether we've got as much of the same power, but certainly a sort of, look, you're a small country. Why do we get, you know, why do we allow other countries, much smaller economies than us, tell us whether they'll take their foreign criminals back?
I mean, it's not hard to work out. And you're right. I mean, obviously, we can't punch as forcefully as the United States. But even so, the idea that we're impotent is nonsense.
Absolutely.
I mean, but it's the groupthink idea of a certain type of Western politician that stops it from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also because we're bad people, because we colonised half the world, and so we're bad, and we should still be paying for that. I assume that's what they think. What else are you talking about?
What else are we talking about? We are going to get into, in fact, there's obviously the Auschwitz Memorial Day, 80 years, clearly important that, you know, the whole cliche of lest we forget and everything, which I know is applied to war.
People are forgetting.